In the sewing shop, the work was boiling. Masters were stitching, dyeing, and embroidering. A young girl, Carolina, was on a special account with her superiors. She was praised for her diligence, kind and non-conflict character, and was regularly awarded bonuses. At last it was lunchtime. The women laid out supplies on the table. They ate and talked. "Caroline, why are you glowing today? We noticed at once. Something important on your mind? Come on, tell us what happened." The girl was in a hurry to share her joy with her colleagues. "Yesterday the notary called, made an appointment, said about the inheritance. So I'm happy. It's my beloved grandfather took care of me. He raised me, we lived soul to soul. He has a cottage in the country. There are such beautiful places. A clear, deep lake, a forest, mushrooms, berries. So he bequeathed his house to me after his death. Today I'll tell Scott that I've got the inheritance." Molly shook her head. "What's that for? Don't be in a hurry to tell your fiancé everything. You've only been dating for a short time. You don't really know anything. I've lived here all my life, and I've never heard of the Hendersons. And I don't know what your Scott's up to either. Be careful. Don't trust too much. Find out who your boyfriend is before you share that kind of news. You're naive. Have you even been to his house? Did he invite you to visit?" Caroline pouted her lips and even took offense. "What are you saying, Aunt Molly? As if you were jealous of my happiness. My Scott's not easy. He has his own consulting agency. He told me so himself. I didn't really know what it was, so I didn't really ask. And I know his address. And I've had dinner with his mom twice in a restaurant. And he loves me, and he's already hinted at marriage. So we're serious. And my grandfather's house is dear to me as a memory. It's where I spent my childhood. If you invest in it, you can build a great holiday home. I could go there with my family, have a summer holiday." The women shouted at Molly too, and she stopped teaching Caroline about life. And she was still in the clouds, remembering how romantically she and Scott had met. Is that only in novels or films? And the simple village girl, who worked as a seamstress, had never dreamed that such a handsome man would fall in love with her. Caroline knew almost nothing about her parents and did not remember them. Her grandparents raised her from the age of 3 in the village. When Carolina grew older, of course, she asked many questions about her dad and mom. But Grandpa would answer sharply, "I don't know who your daddy is. And your mom's no good. My daughter Chloe gave birth to you from who knows who and left you. She said it was for the summer, but it turned out to be for life. And she's disappeared somewhere. She's got only new suitors. So forget about her. End of story." Caroline always remembered her childhood with special warmth. An old but good house, a Russian stove, firewood, woks, a poker, and her grandmother's delicious chowder, consisting of only 3 ingredients: onions, potatoes, and eggs. But how delicious it was. Or her okrushkon gas made of black bread with homemade sour cream. The taste is unforgettable. All day long you could run barefoot in the fields, on the grass, climb trees, eat unwashed apples, and pears straight from the branch. In the evenings, Grandma knitted socks and mittens, and Carolina helped her wind the yarn and listened to long, slightly scary, but very interesting fairy tales. Carolina was 10 when her beloved grandmother passed away. She died so suddenly. A heart attack. Grandpa turned black with grief, kept crying and crying for his Maggie in heaven. They'd lived their whole lives in perfect harmony. From then on, Granddaddy pulled his granddaughter alone. He was a fisherman, often went fishing with the men. He taught Carolina this craft. Already at 13, the girl knew all kinds of bait and lures. And she could tie a hook or change a float in seconds. She learned to clean even the nasty roughs and fry redfish to a golden crust in sour cream. And in autumn, she and her grandfather started another trade, mushroom hunting. It was also a quiet hunt. They would get up in the dark, put on rubber boots, take a huge bag with a big rucksack and go into the forest. Caroline remembered her grandfather's advice and instructions for the rest of her life. He loved to philosophize. Remember, granddaughter, Mother Nature, she is alive, she can bestow, and may take offense. So you should treat her with care. Don't trample on mushrooms, don't destroy the mushroom. Carefully cut mushrooms and cover that place with moss and leaves so that it does not dry out. Don't be greedy, take as much as you can eat. And don't forget to say thank you. Then the way will be easy, you won't get lost, and you'll come back with a harvest. After the school graduation, Grandpa let Carolina go back to town. You need to study further, my fish. I see that you have dexterous hands, you yourself sew what outfits. So go to school to become a seamstress. It's a good job, it'll always feed you, and you won't run out of money. Carolina didn't want to leave, and was even afraid to leave. She hugged her grandfather and lamented. What about you here alone? And how will I be without you? You always help me with advice and deeds. Maybe I'd better stay home? The wise grandfather insisted. It's hard for me to let you go, Caroline, I confess. But there's no other way. You see, our village lives only on fishing. There's no work or suitors for you. And you're young, you need to make your own life. I only ask one thing. If your heart falls in love with someone, don't hurry, don't rush, so you don't get burned like your mom. City boys are like that. They just want to have fun. And then have a baby without a husband. It's embarrassing, you see. Remember, if a man really loves you, he'll marry you. He'll bring you home as his wife. And you don't need any affairs. Don't forget me. Come and see me sometimes and I'll be waiting for you. I'll miss you. Goodbye, my little swallow. It wasn't easy for Caroline to settle in the bustling city. She went straight to college, though. And they gave her a dormitory, but the girl was considered strange. She always confused the buses, could get lost in the neighborhood where she lived, categorically refused from student gatherings, did not walk with anyone, and she didn't even look at boys. And there was no such thing as someone directly into her soul. The classmates with their stupid jokes and ridiculous antics rather repelled, but Caroline was the best in her studies and in practice. After graduation, she got a job in a sewing shop and began to receive a good salary. She rented a flat. Life seemed to be better. She settled down. She only lacked the most important thing, a beloved man by her side. One day, Carolina was invited by a work colleague to a birthday party. The girl returned home in the late evening. She missed the last bus, but it was not very far to walk. She decided to walk. Caroline walked along the dark streets, almost running. She felt uneasy. The weather had turned bad. It was starting to rain. There were no passers-by at all. Suddenly, she was accosted by a guy who came out of a back alley. Hey, beautiful, hello. Miss me? We'll cheer you up. Wait a minute. Where are you running to? Then come on over here. Have a drink, relax, and we'll warm you up. The trio laughed nastily and started to catch up with the frightened Caroline, who ran away screaming. She was lucky. She managed to run out into the carriageway when the villains caught up with her and surrounded her. Wow, she's so stubborn, and the figure is awesome. So the girl fought back and screamed. People, somebody help me. Get away from me. I'm not going anywhere with you. Let me go. I have to go home. But the villains weren't going to back down. They realized the victim was defenseless and there was no one outside. Caroline was terrified, and then a car pulled up right next to them. A tough, athletic guy jumped out and shouted, Hey, gangsters, get away from the girl. Now, who am I talking to? He literally, in a couple of minutes, clicked all three. The scoundrels ran away, cursing both the stranger and the guy who interceded for her. The bloke himself took Caroline's hand and said firmly, Everybody, calm down, Miran, but you shouldn't go out alone at this late hour. This neighborhood isn't very safe. My name is Scott. Don't be afraid. Get in the car. I'll take you home. Don't cry. Take your handkerchief. Caroline got into the car, wiping away her tears. She was shaking violently. She gave the address and wailed. Thank you, Scott. I was so scared. I'd never even had a boyfriend before, and now this. I was late for a visit, and I missed my bus. My name's Caroline. I can't believe what they were going to do to me. I feel sick to my stomach. The guy drove the girl home and said, Okay, Caroline, I'm going to protect you now. Agreed. I really like you, I really do. Such a fragile, delicate, a little naive girl. You have such beautiful brown hair. I can't get enough of you. You're not wearing any makeup. And you're so pretty yourself. Girls are different now. They're not so keen on having fun. They hang themselves, smear makeup on their faces like they're plastering a house. We're different. I've never met anyone like you before. Tomorrow's a day off, so I suggest we go to the cinema. Take a walk. Do you mind? Caroline nodded and answered, It's okay to go for a walk, as long as you don't do anything stupid. I like you too, so I'll be looking forward to seeing you." And so their romance began. Scott wooed Caroline so nicely, took her to the cinema, cafes, gave her flowers. He even introduced her to his mum. They had dinner together in a restaurant. Caroline was worried for nothing. Mrs. Scarlett turned out to be a nice, sweet woman, not at all like a rich lady. She received Caroline well and was glad that her son had found such a nice, modest girl. The girl herself thought that she was very lucky that she and Scott had a mutual love, and the wedding was not far off. She told Scott everything that evening. He even whistled. "Oh, really, Caroline? Where your grandfather's cabin is, it's a tourist spot. I've heard that the plots there are worth a fortune. But your grandfather left you a generous gift. If you sell this land, you can invest it profitably and live a good life, instead of slaving in a garment factory for pennies. That's what we'll do." Yes, Caroline hesitated. She didn't like that the groom had already decided everything for her. She hadn't even been to the notary yet. So she answered sharply, "No, Scott, I'm not going to sell the house. I grew up there. It's very dear to me. On the contrary, I thought it would be a holiday home where the whole family could go in the summer. Even the air there is intoxicating. It's good for your health." The guy did not aggravate the situation. On the contrary, abruptly changed the subject. "Whatever you say, kitten, I'll stay out of it." "Well then, let's get to the second part of your plan, to create a family. Look, I've already ordered a restaurant, counted how many guests will be. It's going to cost a lot of money. Plus the dress, the suit, the rings. You know, I just can't go on without you. I can't believe we're all living apart like children. You're still holding me back, and I'm 30 years old. I want to kiss you and open the world of love to you. I've already arranged it at the registry office. You don't have to wait a month. We'll get married out of turn." The bride was dumbfounded, looked at the records and shook her head. "Scott, it's a cosmic sum. I even confused in the zeros. But why all this? Who and what to prove? I hate pomp and circumstance. Let's sign modestly and go traveling, especially if I have a holiday coming up. But why would I want to do that? Expensive dresses. I'll wear it once in my life, and then it'll just sit in my wardrobe. I'll make myself an outfit just the way I want it. I just need to buy a nice fabric. And traveling is new emotions and impressions." Caroline continued, "We'll remember it for the rest of our lives. Especially I have hardly been anywhere. I want to see new cities in the world in general. But for some reason you are in such a hurry. We've already planned everything and applied. We'll wait a month like everyone else. I'll be done with my wedding dress by then. We have our whole lives ahead of us." But Scott started kissing her hotly and whispering, "I can't wait. I'm crazy about you, my little star. You're right, there's no need to spend too much money. We'll do what you say. We'll get married. And then I'll take you to the most beautiful place in the world and make you the happiest." Caroline melted in the hands of her beloved, and it seemed that only joy and happiness were ahead of her, for now they were together forever. Scott really arranged everything, and he and Caroline signed a couple of days later without a beautiful dress, only rings bought. For the first wedding night, the man rented a suite in an expensive hotel. He was very tender, very affectionate. They loved each other, lounged in bed, and made plans for further happy life. And they were preparing for the wedding trip. The husband showed his wife beautiful pictures from resorts and eagerly told how they will have a good holiday. So far, they lived in Caroline's rented flat. This confused her. She thought that after the wedding they would live in Scott's mansion, but he explained it to her. "Mom and I thought it would be a surprise, but we're a little behind. The renovations are almost finished. We were going to have a big bedroom with a huge bed, a window overlooking the garden and a balcony. We'll move in soon." All Caroline had to do before she left was go to a notary and get a will. She had hoped that her husband would drive her, but he had an important meeting at work, so she took the bus. During rush hour, the bus was jammed. The conductor managed to squeeze through the crowd and punch tickets. Her face was red and angry. There was a boy of about 10 years old, an ordinary teenager in a tracksuit, sneakers, and a cap. When it was his turn to pay, the boy began to dig hard in his many pockets, sniffled, and began to babble. Now, where's the money? Did he lose it? The conductor began to lose patience and shouted. So, smart guy, don't play comedy with me here. I know you hares, it's always the same, either pay or get off. At the next stop on the control line, your parents will get a ticket. The kid's embarrassed. People looked at him judgmentally. Many people supported the conductor, saying that young people were getting used to traveling without paying for their tickets. For some reason, Carolina felt so sorry for the poor man. She gave some change to the conductor. I'll pay for him. Let him go. Don't push the boy. He's just a kid. Maybe he really dropped the money somewhere. Things happen. The woman punched the ticket and walked away. The boy looked at his savior with such gratitude. Thank you very much, Auntie. I lost the money. I don't know where it is. My name's Kevin. I just got in a fight with my stepmom. I'm upset. She wants to take my dad's flat and kick me out. I've got nowhere to go. She's mean. I don't like her. Caroline was shocked by this revelation. She started to ask her questions quietly. I'm Caroline. You've had a rough life. But how can it be? Does your father agree with it? Why does he allow it? The boy blushed even more and answered. My daddy is in prison. But you don't think he didn't do anything wrong. Daddy used to work for a company, and then he got cheated. The money went missing, and everyone thought he was the one. I stayed with my stepmom. I'm so worried about Daddy, I miss him, and I don't know what to do. Caroline shook her head. She had to get off at the next stop. She said, I feel for you, Kevin, and I wish Daddy would be released soon. Have a good day. I've got to run. The kid said goodbye. I live at 10 Oak Street in a 5-story building. 3rd floor, flat 40. If you need anything, come and visit me, Aunt Caroline, and have a good day. The girl came to the notary under the impression of dialogue with the boy. She kept thinking about his difficult fate. She was received by a nice young middle-aged man. He began to read out the will. The girl signed all the documents, talked a little, and wanted to leave, when she saw a framed photo on the notary's desk. From there, the same boy Kevin was looking at her. The girl exclaimed, Excuse me, is this your son, Kevin? What a liar. He said his father was in prison and his stepmother was abusing him. But I believed him. I paid for his ticket. Why don't you give your son a fare? He almost got kicked off the bus by the conductor. Nicholas began to explain. Okay, stop. That's my son in the photo, but his name is Alex. You must be mistaken. I don't know what this is about at all. Caroline told Nicholas what had happened on the bus, and at the end added, I don't know how to explain it, but he looks like 2 drops of water like your son, like his twin brother. Well, I'm sorry, maybe I'm confused. Goodbye and goodbye. Caroline held the will in her hands. She was in a good mood, so she decided to surprise her husband and visit him, to see just the mansion they would soon be living in, to talk to her mother-in-law. She remembered the address. Scott had mentioned it once. She was amazed by the house, almost 3 floors, 2 balconies, a huge territory. Caroline even caught fire. Well, am I really going to live here soon? What luck. What a beauty. It is true that there's no sign of renovation. But I don't know, maybe it's interior decoration. My favorite is preparing such a surprise. Caroline rang the doorbell. She was opened by a man in uniform, apparently a security guard. The girl said proudly, Good afternoon, I'm Scott's wife. Let me through. But the man frowned and pushed her away. Scott who? This is the home of a respectable man, Mr. Benjamin. He and his wife and his children live here. And there's no Scott. You're confused. Citizen. Caroline apologized and left. She couldn't figure it out. How could it be? The cattle said 27th Avenue, opposite the green supermarket. It's just like that. And the house is just as he described it. Could it be that I was listening inattentively and got the address wrong? Then the girl automatically began to search the internet for her husband's company. He said it was called Onyx. She found its address and immediately rushed there. But there was a bump in the road. It was some warehouse's hangars. Nobody around. A terrible guess even struck her head. What if Aunt Molly's right and Scott's been lying to her all this time? The girl felt sick to her stomach. But why? What would be the point of Scott leading her around by the nose? Although now Caroline began to compare everything and looked at everything completely differently. Wyatt Scott insisted and even accelerated the wedding after he'd found out about her inheritance. After all, they were only planning to get married a month later. And why hadn't he ever invited her to his house? He made up some excuse. Is that normal? Caroline cried. She immediately dialed her husband's number. What's going on, honey? I've been to your house, but it's not yours. Now, I'm wandering around the warehouses. I'm trying to find your firm, but it's gone. I'm beginning to think you're a liar. Explain everything to me at once. I got the will. I wanted to surprise you, but I see you've already surprised me so much. I can't get over it. Who are you, Scott? Who did I marry? Maybe you're not even a Henderson. Surprisingly, Scott laughed. He answered calmly. What the hell are you thinking, my favorite detective? I can hear your voice shaking. You're about to cry. You've got it all wrong, Caroline. Where are you now? I'll come and get you, and I'll show you everything. Why don't make up things that aren't true. Stay where you are. I'll be right there. The girl's heart was relieved. She wiped away her tears and exhaled a sigh of relief. There, I always get it all mixed up. Scott loves me and wasn't lying at all. Now he'll come and show me both his house and his work. The husband did indeed come very quickly, put Caroline in the car, bent down to kiss her. Suddenly she felt a prick and a chill in her neck. That was it. The light began to fade in her eyes. To Nicholas Kulesov's working day had long since come to an end, and the client who had told him that she had seen a boy who looked like 2 drops of water, like his own son, was still in his mind. The man drank his coffee and thought. So Alex has a twin brother. But how can that be? The orphanage didn't tell me anything about it. I looked at his papers. What am I going to do? No, I have to go to the address Caroline gave me. At least I remembered it, so I can see for myself. Maybe the girls got it all wrong and the kids are only remotely alike. Until I see them for myself, I won't believe it. Nicholas easily found the right address and rang the doorbell, not knowing what he was going to say. But when the door was opened by a boy who looked like his son, he was shocked and said hello. Hi, are you Kevin? Aunt Caroline told me about you. Did you meet her on the bus? My name is Uncle Nicholas. Can I come in? Are your parents home? I need to talk to them. The boy let the guest in and began to fuss about in a very mature way. In the kitchen, he put the kettle on the cooker, took some biscuits out of the box and spoke. I'm alone for now, without adults. My stepmother's gone to the shop and my dad's in prison. But he's not guilty of anything, and my stepmother hates me and wants to send me to an orphanage. She says that's where I belong, and I don't want to go there. I don't want to run away from home. I'm so fed up with everything. Nobody cares about me. I asked Aunt Caroline to help me, but she never came. Maybe that's why she sent you to help me. I don't know why I didn't realize. Nicholas was embarrassed, but he did not dare to say that he came for a completely different matter. True, he saw the pleading in the child's eyes and began to ask. What's your daddy's name and why was he in jail? Tell me everything you know so that I can find out more about him. Where's your mom and why does your stepmother live here? If it's your dad's flat, your stepmom can't do anything with it. I'm telling you as a notary. The boy was eager to talk. Daddy's name is Terrence Brown, and he worked at Optima. It's not far from here. It's a big building with a clock on it. Money went missing and Dad was accused of fraud and went to prison. He came home crying and said he hadn't taken a penny. Or someone had falsified the report on purpose. And Mom? I don't remember. I've always lived here with my dad and stepmom. I asked my dad about my mom a lot, but he just said she was gone once, that's all. After my stepmom always disliked me, I could feel it. When Dad was around, she was just pretending. And when he was at work, she'd yell at me. She'd call me bad and lock me in my room. I complained to Daddy, but he probably didn't believe me. Because when he's home, Sharon's different. She smiles lusciously, calls me Kevin. And when my dad went to prison, my stepmom got mad at me. But I'm not a little kid anymore. I don't let her hurt me either. We fight all the time, and she keeps saying she's going to put me in an orphanage. Nicholas replied, I'll be honest, Kevin, I'm not promising anything, but I'll try to figure things out and help you. But you know, that's why I'm here. Tell me, have you never had a brother? The boy was surprised. No, I don't have a brother, but that's a pity. I'd be glad to have one. We'd be friends then, I'd love him. Nicholas took a picture of his son out of his wallet and showed it to the boy. This is my son Alex. I adopted him, took him from an orphanage when he was very young. Look how much you two look alike. It's unbelievable. So I thought I'd come and see you and find out. Kevin was so excited and offered. Wow, it's like a film. Is there any way to verify it? I saw a film recently where they did a genetic test to find out if a mother's daughter is her own. Here, hold my hair, they did that in the film, and check it out. I'd be very happy if I had a brother. That's so great. Just then the front door opened and Kevin's stepmother walked in. The boy turned pale and fidgeted. But Nicholas understood him without words, gestured him to be quiet, and went out into the hallway. He saw a statuesque, spectacular brunette with impressive forms. She took off her high-heeled shoes and asked in surprise, "Kevin, we have guests. Why don't you say something?" "My name is Sharon. And who are you and what is your business?" The visitor introduced himself. "My name is Nicholas Hills. I'm a notary by trade. And your husband, Terrence, is a childhood friend of mine. I thought I'd pay him a visit, and here I am." Kevin told me all about it briefly. Sharon's eyes lit up. She immediately started hovering round the guest. She offered him lunch, insinuated that her husband was the last thief, and that he wouldn't be released for a long time. She was suffering from loneliness. Nicholas was disgusted to hear such things. How could it be? When a strange man came to the house, and the wife behind her husband's back is already ready to have an affair. This woman was so unpleasant to him. The man replied sharply, "I'll try to help Terrence as a friend. I'm also married, have a son, and value my family very much. I'll go. Have a nice day." Nicholas returned home in total confusion. His son Alex ran out to meet him. Once again, a stab in the heart. The boy was happy to see his father, talking about his success at school. And Nicholas thought, "My son is growing up with me in love and care, and my wife doesn't like him either. And he tells me that a lot. What about me? I'm just like Kevin's dad, I just brush it off. What if my Chris is hurting my son too? I don't see it yet, and Kevin needs to be helped. The kid's trying to reach out to adults, telling strangers about his troubles, and no one can hear him. What if he really is Alex's sibling? It's just questions and mysteries, and no answers yet." Nicholas ate the fried potatoes and onions his son had prepared and asked, "Why are you alone? Where's Mum? Didn't she cook dinner? Where's she gone?" The child said, "Mum got dressed up this morning and left. She said she was going to a birthday party with friends and would be late. And I wanted to go with her, but she got angry and told me to stay home. Daddy, tell me, why is Mummy like that? She doesn't like you and me at all. She's always nagging, always going away. She never asks how I'm doing. I'm so hurt. And you, I'm not a little kid anymore. Dad, I can see everything. Mum must have another man. She's changed so much. She doesn't need us anymore. I can hear you two fighting. You know, to be honest, I wish she'd never come back." Nicholas was shocked by his son's words. He tried his best to calm him down, even though he realized that the child had said out loud what he himself had been thinking for a long time. He and his wife had long been at odds. They lived out of habit, as if they were strangers. There were no children in common, and Nicholas persuaded his wife to take a child from the orphanage. Chris, stubborn to the last, but still agreed. But in fact, she did not want children. All she was interested in was the salons, the shops, sleeping till lunchtime and loving herself. And she didn't want to disrupt her comfortable life. So when little Alex came into their family, it was a real torture for Chris. She didn't want to get up to the baby at night and spend all her time with him. Nicholas so hoped that the child would strengthen their family, but it turned out differently. Now all the worries about his son fell on his shoulders, and his wife only ran away, and they were estranged. Only to hear how she resented that the room is a mess, that Alex grows irresponsible, lazy, that does not obey. But it wasn't exactly like that. Alex obeyed only Daddy, loved him with all his heart. He loved Chris too, when he was little, reaching out to her. But he kept running into coldness on her part and gradually realized that his mom didn't love him. And trying to attract attention to himself, did everything to spite her. The situation had become very heated lately. Nicholas also understood. Chris is clearly attracted to someone, but now she's rarely home. She stopped cooking altogether. They slept apart. It couldn't be called a normal family. But the man still did not dare to have a serious conversation with his wife in divorce. He thought that Alex wouldn't understand what it would be like without his mom. But now, when the son voiced it, Nicholas decided to act. He himself was already unbearable to be at home, and his wife caused irritation. He could not sleep for a long time. His thoughts were confused. Then he thought about how to separate from Chris, then again thought about Kevin. His wife showed up almost mid-morning drunk. She reeked of men's perfume. She'd obviously been having fun with her lover. She, of course, saw Nicholas in the kitchen, but indifferently passed by, staggered to the bathroom. And the husband was suddenly so angry. He grabbed her hand and whispered, "I do not even ask where and with whom you were. It's written all over your face. You don't want a family and you don't want a son, so I'm filing for divorce tomorrow. And I can't go on living like this. Look at you, what you look like, a woman of easy behavior. Disgraceful. Don't you hate it?" Chris fixed her tangled hair, not at all embarrassed, and answered indifferently, "And Alex is not my son to worry about. You're the one who brought him home. Raise him yourself. I am young and beautiful, I have a lot of admirers, and I will not be lost. I haven't loved you for a long time, Nicholas. Divorce? That's fine, it's better that way. I can't stand to see that boy anymore. He disgusts me. He's a stranger to me. I'll leave tomorrow and I'll keep the flat in the center. I have every right." Nicholas was even relieved when he and Chris parted. Alex was cheerful too. Nicholas told him about Kevin and his misfortune. He and his son took the material for examination and eagerly awaited the result. Nicholas also applied for Terrence's parole, asked for a review of his case. There really were a lot of inconsistencies. It was very badly cooked up. Nicholas and his son decided to visit Kevin, but because of his stepmother did not come to his home, but instead invited him to his home. The boys immediately became friends and got along. They are the same age, common interests and hobbies. Now they were thick as thieves. Kevin felt so comfortable and relaxed at Nicholas's house. He thanked him often. "And thank you for everything. Why are you trying to save Daddy for taking me in? I have real friends now. And I just don't understand where Aunt Caroline has disappeared to. Do you know what happened to her?" Nicholas wondered. For all this whirlwind of events, he completely forgot about Caroline and decided to find out everything about her. She didn't answer the phone. This alarmed the man. Through an acquaintance in the police, he found out where Caroline lived and worked. But the landlady of the rented flat said angrily, "I'm outraged. The apartment is gone. She has not taken her things. She has not paid for the month. It's an outrage. I don't know what to do. A new tenant is moving in tomorrow. Where am I supposed to put that girl's stuff? Why don't you take it and tell her it's irresponsible?" Nicholas sorted everything out, took Caroline's things back to his place, paid his debt, but he was even more worried. And when he arrived at the sewing shop, his suspicions only increased. The foreman was surprised. "We don't understand anything ourselves. Caroline is always so responsible, never failed. Her holiday is long over, and she is still not at work. Of course, according to the law, I should have fired her a long time ago. But, I'd hate to lose someone like her. It's not like her to be a habitual truant. Besides, she just got married. I hope she'll call me back any day now and explain everything." And Molly said, "You should check out her bloke, for all he's worth. He's a dark man, he's no good. No matter how much we told Caroline not to marry him, she didn't want to. She fell in love with him. A naive girl, she didn't want to notice anything. Find out who Scott Henderson is, what kind of business he's in. I'm sure he had something to do with our Caroline's disappearance. We're very worried about her. She's never missed a day of work. She couldn't just not show up for work like that. She's in trouble. We were thinking of going to the police. We can't sort this out on our own." Nicholas also decided to go to an investigator he knew and convinced him to come look for the girl. The police took a statement and started looking for her. First of all, the notary decided to go with the police to the inherited house. Maybe the girl was there. The place was really picturesque, a riot of greenery and the smell of herbs. The wind was free. Nicholas and the policeman cautiously walked around the house. It was obvious that no one had lived there for a long time. The fence had swayed, all the tall grass was overgrown. There was a lock on the door, and suddenly the policeman said, "The lock, like the door, hasn't been opened long ago. The hinges are greased, but underneath there's rust on the board. Look, and the grass on the doorstep is crumpled. I say we tear it down and check what's inside." Since we've come this far, we did it. The men went inside and immediately heard a faint mooing. They rushed into the small bedroom and gasped. Caroline was lying on the bed with a gag in her mouth. Her arms and legs were tied with ropes, and it was painful to look at her. Her eyes were cloudy. She tried to get up and was desperately shaking her head. Nicholas carefully removed the gag and brought a bottle of water to her lips. Caroline drank long and greedily. After catching her breath, she began to talk. "Nicholas, thank you for finding me. I had no hope of being rescued. It's my husband, the bastard, and my mother-in-law. Because of the inheritance, he injected me with something and brought me here. At first, he just persuaded me to sell the house and the land. He said he needed the money urgently. He begged and pleaded, but when I flatly refused, he and his mother tied me up and scared me that I'd die that way if I didn't come to my senses. They bring me water and food every few days, let me wash up, walk a bit, and then leave me here again. Scott's got the will. I don't know where he put it. I was so scared I only realized who I'd married. He's a con man, his company's a fake, and he doesn't live in that house he kept telling me about. I don't know who he really is. Please save me from him. I'm a mess. I don't want to die, and I won't sell my grandfather's house either. What's in it for me? I love Scott so much. How can I trust anyone now?" The girl cried on Nicholas's shoulder, and he felt something inside him. At that moment, he stroked her shoulders like a little girl and said, all right, don't cry. All the bad things are over. Let's go to my place for now. I've already taken your things from the landlady. She wanted to throw them away. You'll stay with me while the investigation is going on. Don't worry, your husband can't do anything to the house without your consent. I hope you're not going to put up with him after all this." Caroline pressed her palms to her temples. "So what happens to me when I see him? You can't imagine how he has turned from a loving man into an indifferent cynic. I beg him, let him go. And he has ice in his eyes. I was the fool who loved him, and he didn't love me at all. But I realized it too late." Caroline gave a statement to the police. Then they removed the ligature marks and let the poor girl go. When Nicholas carried her home in his arms, the boys were stunned. Kevin sobbed. "Aunt Caroline, what's the matter with you?" "Who did this to you?" Alex asked. "Uncle Nicholas, what happened?" Kevin asked. The man commanded. "Guys, all questions later. You can see she's not well. Alex, run and fill the bathroom with hot water. Kevin, you put the kettle on and heat up something to eat. Get a towel and my bathrobe. We'll all work together to heal, to save Caroline. We're a team." Caroline soaked in the hot bath with pleasure, then drank hot sweet tea with sandwiches, listened to the boys chatter. She couldn't even wonder why the kids were together now. Her eyes closed on their own. She was safe at last. The police are looking for a villain, and there is a real man around, her savior Nicholas. The girl fell asleep as soon as her head touched the pillow. She slept for almost 24 hours. She awoke to a cool hand on her forehead. "Aunt Caroline, it's me, Kevin. How did you sleep so long? Shouldn't we call a doctor?" "Do you have a fever?" "No, I think it's fine. You're not feeling well?" The girl smiled. She was moved to tears by such concern. Alex also stood in the doorway, looking concerned. Caroline stretched, sat up, and suddenly hugged the boy. "Everything will be all right now. I'm so glad to see you. Alex, come on. Introduce me to your brother. You're definitely twins. You live here now? What happened? Tell me." The boys went on and on about all the recent events and how Nicholas was trying to get Kevin's dad out of jail and that they were best friends now. Then Kevin sadly remarked, "Like you could say I'm living in Uncle Nicholas's house. I can't go home. And my stepmother is happy to have me. I'm just a nuisance to her at home. I can't wait for Daddy to get out. I miss him so much. Now I have a little brother, we're a family. Uncle Nicholas had a genetic test done. It says Alex and I are the closest thing to family. That's really great. Are you going to live here now too?" "That's great. How do you make pizza? We bought some tinned pineapple and sausage." We thought we'd give it a try." Carolina replied with a smile. "I know how to do everything. We'll bake a pizza, make some soup and compe. We have to give Alex's new dad a nice dinner. It's a thank you for everything." Nicholas was so tired during the day he had a lot of customers. Then he went to the police to find out what was new about Caroline and Terrence. She came home tired to the utmost and thought sadly that he would have to stand at the cooker. After all, the boys must have been on dry food all day. But what was his surprise when he saw a generously laid table? The smell was mind-blowing. Caroline simply said, "Hello, Nicholas. You wash your hands and come to the table. The boys and I have worked very hard. I hope you enjoy it." The man devoured the treats with both cheeks. He'd forgotten what family dinners were like, and the flat had been transformed. You can see a woman's hand at work. Everything's in place, clean, and even Alex's room is tidy. "But you surprised me. Caroline, how did you manage to teach the boys order?" "It's my pleasure," Nicholas exclaimed. The girl laughed. "Yes, we became friends. Tomorrow I go to work. I've already phoned my boss. Thank him. He was cool about it, didn't fire me. I'm thinking we should all go rollerblading in the park this weekend. Turns out Alex and Kevin can do that. I've been wanting to learn for ages. What do you think?" Nicholas immediately agreed. "I support it. It's been so long since we've been out, but I've never roller skated, and with my height I'll look like a circus bear. That's okay. We'll have a good laugh." The week flew by like a day. Nicholas drove Caroline to work and picked her up, never leaving her for a minute. He took such touching care of her. It even seemed like she was married to him, not Scott. They were so good together. Soon Caroline was called to the police. The scoundrel husband and his mother were caught. It turned out they were professional scammers, and they had more than one woman who had been defrauded. They were looking for any way to get rich, and they weren't related at all. They were just colluding in the same scheme. But things didn't go according to plan with Caroline. She wasn't rich at all, and at first Scott just had fun with her out of boredom. He liked to show off. It was second nature to him. He even thought he was in love. He really liked Caroline, but when he learned about the inheritance, he immediately remembered what he had to do. That's why he was in a hurry to get married, so that it would be easier to take possession of the plot and sell it. The beloved will be stubborn, and so it was. Caroline, despite the fear and horror, did not agree to sell the house, and Scott's accomplice offered to get rid of her. That's what he said at the confrontation. And Mrs. Scarlett pressured me to kidnap Caroline. She had no relatives, no one to look for her, and the countryside was wild, with few inhabitants. If the body was left in the thicket, the wild beasts would do the deed themselves, and the end would be in the water. But I couldn't. I didn't want to kill her, so I kept dragging it out. I kept coming, feeding Caroline, trying to get her to agree to sell the damn property. I really wanted to be done with all this black business. I thought I'd stop, settle down. It's all Mrs. Scarlett's fault. She made me do it. I had nothing to do with it. Caroline, astonished at her ex-husband's insolence and cynicism, screamed in his face. "How could you? You lied to me from the first minute, and about my mother, and about work, and about the house. All lies. I hate you. You hear me? I think we'll be divorced in no time. Get out of my life forever." The criminals went to prison for a long time, as they should have. There was a trail of dark deeds behind them. There were other victims of the deceivers. Angry women demanded the return of huge sums of money or property that Scott and his pseudo-mother had swindled out of them. Caroline didn't want to leave Nicholas, but she didn't feel comfortable staying with him. So one night at dinner, she decided to have a conversation. "Nicholas, guys, I wanted to talk to you. I'm not in danger anymore, and I'm really worried that I'm still living with you. Maybe I'm embarrassing you. Maybe it's time for me to get a flat." The boys jumped right up to her. They were so funny, so angular, so worried, and they tucked themselves into the hem of her dressing gown. "No, Aunt Caroline, we'll never let you go. You're like our mom. You're so kind, and you cook so good. And you're the best." Carolina wept. She was very pleased with such words. She moved her eyes to Nicholas, and he also answered. "Stay, Caroline, please. With your arrival, we became a family again, a friendly, real family. Why ruin everything? What if everything works out? Fate brought us together for a reason. Only Caroline seemed to breathe a sigh of relief that all the troubles were over. And then, once again, trouble came from nowhere. Nicholas received a phone call from an investigator he knew, informing him that there had been a fire in the colony where Terrence was imprisoned. A lot of people were hurt. Terrence is now in intensive care. The prognosis is very bad. They didn't tell Kevin anything at first. They hoped for a miracle and Terrence would survive, but no. A couple of days later, they told him he died. So Kevin decided not to hide the truth, but the conversation was very difficult. Nicholas struggled to find the right words. Caroline held the boy's hand. "We have some very bad news. Your daddy died in prison. He's gone. I know it's a terrible thing to lose a father. It'll make it easier if you cry. And know that we'll be here for you." Kevin didn't shed a tear, but he looked at Caroline and Nicholas in a strange way and asked in an adult way, "What's going to happen to me now? I'll be taken to an orphanage now, won't I? Uncle Nicholas, help me, please take me in. I promise I'll obey. My stepmother doesn't want me, she'll put me in an orphanage. Hide me in your house." Once again, Nicholas didn't lie to the boy. "Come here, Kevin, look me in the eyes and remember, you are Alex's brother, so you are not a stranger to me. Do you understand? You can't hide. We have to get a guardianship to make it legal. We'll give your daddy a proper burial. I'll help. Then I'll deal with your stepmom, and we'll go together to find out about custody. We have the results of the evaluation. I think they'll be very accommodating. It's not a quick process, but we have to be patient. Do you believe me? Tell me it's important that you believe me, Kevin." The boy couldn't stand it and cried, hugged Nicholas and whispered, "I believe you, Uncle Nicholas. Thank you. If it wasn't for you, I would have run away from home, wandering somewhere. I want to live with you and my brother, with Aunt Caroline. I'm fine with you. Just don't leave me, okay? I'm really scared. And I feel sorry for my dad. I can't believe he's gone." Terrence was given a final farewell. They ordered a memorial service and a wake. Kevin was crying, holding his father's things to his heart. He immediately put his watch on his hand and wore it from that day on as a memento. Nicholas won custody, though it wasn't easy. He and Caroline had to sign, so the boys grew up in a complete family, lived together, did not quarrel. Caroline managed her men well. They cherished and pitied her. They cared for her touchingly. Years passed. The boys turned 16. There is now a little sister growing up in the family. Caroline and Nicholas shared child, the adorable Annie. It was the boys' birthday. Their parents bought them each a new phone of the latest model, and in the midst of the celebration, Nicholas raised a toast. Nicholas made a toast. "My favorite son's my pride. I love you very much and I want your fondest dreams to come true today. Tell me, what are your dreams? This is very important to me." Kevin boldly said, "Thank you, Dad, for your kind words and for the presents. Alex and I have one dream. We don't know how you and Mom will feel about it. I want to know who my mom is, where she is, why she left me. Alex would also like to know something about his biological parents. Is that okay with you? We love you and we're grateful for everything. It's just that everyone has a right to know their roots." Caroline even turned pale. Her spouse coughed, but he answered, "I respect your opinion, guys, though I don't entirely agree with it, and I suggest we go to an agency. We'll go tomorrow. Maybe they can find out all about your biological parents. But I warn you, sometimes the truth can be very painful. But you're adults. You have to be able to take any news with dignity." The detectives did their job, and it took them a month to find out. And here's what they found out. An elderly grandmother, a neighbor from Kevin's house, helped. The woman knew the family intimately, more than one generation. She told the story of their family. Terrence, Alex and Kevin's father, had dated a girl from a dysfunctional family when he was young. Her name was Gwen. The parents of the guy were strongly opposed to this connection and tried in every possible way to break up the young. And Terrence himself soon realized that the bride is fickle. She often changed suitors. For a long time did not meet with anyone. But soon after their separation, Gwen showed up at the flat to Terrence's parents and said that she was pregnant. Naturally, she did not believe her and kicked out. That's all the old lady remembers. And then, when Terrence was already married to Sharon, he suddenly began to walk with a little boy. Many neighbors were saying that no one had ever seen Sharon pregnant, and the baby was no longer a baby. But Terrence put a stop to any talk and just said, "This is my son Kevin. If anyone says a bad word, he'll have to deal with me." And so they moved on with their lives. The neighbors gossiped and then stopped. They got used to it. Kevin grew up a good boy, kind, open. No one in the yard ever hurt him. Detectives followed the trail and began to learn about the fate of the same Gwen, who was pregnant and missing. And here's what they found out. The girl really got pregnant from a casual acquaintance. To avoid disgrace, hurriedly went to the village. There and gave birth to twins, living with an old grandmother. But she did not become a good mom to children. She started going out again, disappearing at night. She left her children to her elderly and sick grandmother. The grandmother couldn't stand it and gave her a condition. Take the kids and go to your parents in the city. The boys were about a year old, but the absent-minded mother was not going to raise the children and take care of them. Alex was strong, ate and slept well. But Kevin was born weak, shouted all the time, ate very badly, did not gain weight. Gwen decided to drop Alex off at the orphanage, but she took pity on Kevin. She brought him to Terrence at work and ran off on her own. Terrence turned out to be a decent man, raising a son. Loved him and didn't even realize he had a twin brother. And Alex was adopted by Nicholas when he was a year old. The orphanage also did not know that the abandoned boy has a brother. Gwen herself, fate severely punished for such a terrible act, she fell to the bottom, began to use drugs and died in some brothel from an overdose. If it hadn't been for that chance meeting between Caroline and Kevin on the bus, which started it all, the brothers, who were blood brothers, would probably never have known of each other's existence. The boys listened to all of this with bated breath. They thought for a long time, were silent, and then suddenly came up to Caroline and said, "You are the most real, the most beloved and dear. Our mum is the woman who gave birth to us and left us so cynically. She's nothing to us, a stranger. Only you are our real mum. You loved us, treated us when we were sick, patiently endured our antics, taught us wisdom and reason. Thank you. My brother and I are proud of our family." Caroline cried, wiping her tears with her handkerchief. These sincere words touched her soul. She hugged her already so grown-up sons and whispered, You are good favorite boys. I love you as my relatives. No, you are my relatives. Soon you'll be grown up and married. You'll be out of the nest. I want you to know that no matter how your life turns out, your mom will always love and wait for you." All these years, the family every summer went not to the fancy seaside resorts, and in the village to rest in the same grandfather's cottage. Nicholas and the boys disappeared on the lake, fishing. His wife and daughter went to the forest for mushrooms and berries. Then they cooked soup, warmed themselves on cool nights near the stove. There was some kind of special romance in it. They didn't change anything here on purpose, just made some cosmetic repairs. Caroline wanted the house to still have the atmosphere of her new childhood. She reverently looked through her grandfather's old things in the shed and with tears in her eyes remembered how she and her grandfather used to tie knots and catch fish, and how she used to fry these very same raisias until they were golden in sour cream. And her grandfather praised her, stroking her head affectionately. These memories made my heart ache. Caroline shared with her husband details of her childhood, remembered her grandparents. She looked through old black and white photos and, clinging tighter to her beloved husband, he smiled and said, "You are so beautiful now. In your eyes I see a little girl. It's so amazing. I'm glad that we managed to defend and preserve this little corner of your childhood, your soul, realizing how precious it is for you. The places here are really wonderful, and the house is such an atmosphere of peace and kindness. I myself come back from holiday full of energy, and the children only benefit from the fresh air." At such moments, Caroline felt most keenly how happy she was with Nicholas. It was he who became her support in life, gave her a family, the happiness of becoming a mom. Earlier, when she was a teenager, dreamed of finding out where her mom had disappeared, how she could forget her, cut her out of her life. But after the story of her sons, Caroline realized she didn't want to know. She always warmly remembered her grandfather and grandmother, who replaced both her father and mother. She tried not to think about the woman who gave birth to her and abandoned her. Colleagues and acquaintances were happy for her and believed that her acquaintance with Nicholas was not just an accident, but fate. The boys' tangled history was almost a detective story to them. Little Annie was a copy of Nicholas. He loved his daughter very much. He never let her down and spoiled her, and thought that he was incredibly lucky to meet such a wise, kind, loving woman like Caroline. And even though they'd been through a lot of hardships, and raising 3 children is not easy, the main thing is that they overcame all the difficulties together, hand in hand, and knew that no matter what happened, family is the main thing in life and a huge incentive for new achievements. I can't go back. Barbara woke up and asked the doctor to tell her husband she was gone. As a child, Barbara was considered strange in the yard because she wasn't afraid of dentists. When other children were dragged into the doctor's office with tantrums and tear-stained faces, Barbara was eager to peer through the narrow slit of the door and see what was going on. She wasn't afraid during dental treatment. Maybe because she didn't eat a lot of sweets. Or maybe because everything that was happening aroused the girl's keen interest. She followed every movement of the doctors, and afterwards asked a million questions, flapping her naive, childish eyes. The sound of the drill, white coats, all this was an outlandish world for 8-year-old Barbara. It was no surprise to anyone that after graduating from high school, the girl firmly decided to become a dentist. All high school, she diligently prepared, learned chemical formulas, and diligently solved tests in biology. Sometimes Barbara put on a white coat at home, a cap, and imagined that she was seeing patients. She had once borrowed it from a neighbor who worked as a pediatrician at the local clinic. "What do you want to pick other people's teeth, Barbara?" sighed her mother, stirring the borscht. "Well, you want to teach cranky children," parried the daughter, not taking her eyes off the book. "You must be like your grandmother," grinned the woman. "Only she treated livestock and farms. And you've decided to get to people, too." Barbara grinned understandingly. Grandma Angie had worked as a zoo technician in the village for a long time before she retired. Before and after, she had often been asked by the manager to come and check on the animals and attend to difficult cow deliveries. At the same time, Grandma was not shy to cover with selective profanity young graduates of the Veterinary Institute, who had just arrived at the farm and did not even know that it was dangerous to approach the cows and horses from behind. When the farm was disbanded, the tough-tongued old woman continued to be called by the locals. So as long as there were a couple of cows in the village, there was plenty of work. Angie lived where she'd worked half her life in a village near Swan. Barbara's mom, Lexi, took a different path. She didn't want to live in the village and went to the city, hoping to fit in and achieve a higher rank than honorary milkmaid. However, the city did not treat Lexi as favorably as she would have liked. The woman did not advance further than an elementary school teacher, but received a small one-room apartment in the last years of the union for seniority. The kind where the kitchen was already cramped for 2 people. That's where Barbara was born and raised. No matter how cozy it was under her mother's wing, but at the age of 15 the girl thought about living separately. But no way. The modest salary of a teacher did not allow such a luxury. Her father stayed with them for a short time. Like many truckers, he lived for 2 families, of which neither of them knew. In the end, the man simply did not return from another trip. The mother waited 6 months, and then, gathering her courage, filed for a unilateral divorce. Barbara was secretly sad. She loved her father, and she missed his care, advice, and experience. However, after such a prank, her mother did not start any new relationships. She lived with her work and her daughter. The final exams came, followed by vacations. And now Barbara stood in front of the doors of the medical school, struggling with shyness to enter. She had passed by countless times, dreaming of how she would get her student card and credits. But now the familiar outer walls seemed stark and intimidating, even though the fulfillment of her dream depended on them. It felt strange. "Hey, sophomore year?" Someone touched her elbow. Barbara turned around and saw a blonde girl with a pointy nose and strange, age-inappropriate, brightly colored hairpins. "Yeah, from the second one," Barbara replied. "Cool." The stranger glowed and clapped Barbara on the shoulder in an overly brotherly way. "At last I found someone. My name is Kate, by the way." Barbara, she introduced herself. "Like the Crimean ship Hucklack," laughed a new acquaintance. "Let's go find our group and audience." Without waiting for an answer, Kate pulled Barbara by the hand toward the entrance. Perhaps the new classmate was the push Barbara needed to take the next step toward her goal. No one she knew from high school had gotten into medical school, and she felt a little insecure here. There was a sea of new faces around. Many had come to study from the countryside. I came from the village of Savlevo. It's 200 kilometers from here, Kate whispered in the classroom. Where are you from? I'm a local. I grew up here in the city, Barbara answered. She didn't really want to be reprimanded in her first class, but her roommate apparently liked to talk. On the other hand, she needed to make new friends in the student body. Cool. I always wanted to live in the city. But my parents wouldn't let me leave the village until I finished school. Kate rolled her eyes. Barbara stared blankly at her new acquaintance. The skirt, the blouse, the shoes that had been the trend in town last year. Bright shadows and thick lashes. Apparently fashion was delayed in reaching the hinterlands. I want to be a beautician. That in our village no one knows how to take care of themselves, then poultices, then lapping. It's horrible. Kate said it so loudly that she caught the teacher's questioning look. When the danger passed, she expressively poked a finger with bright green lacquer on her eyelids and whispered, I'll also be a makeup artist. See, there is already success. Girlfriends for the wedding all written out. Yes, I'm sure you have. Barbara held back a smile, looking at the bright spots on her face. The pressure, simplicity, and naivete with which Kate communicated both repelled and attracted her at the same time. There was no frostiness of city girlfriends in her. She had a rustic, birch log-like openness that all country folk had. What are you going to do, give shots or nurse? Kate blew her bangs back and stared at Barbara questioningly. I plan to be a dentist, she answered. It's been a dream of mine since I was a kid. Oh well, you'll think of it. She waved her hand. It seemed that Kate and Barbara had gradually become friends, despite their different personalities and goals. The calm, reserved Barbara and the energetic, talkative Kate from the village formed an amusing couple. Studying in medical school was not easy, as teachers at school and Barbara's mother warned. Medicine does not tolerate amateurs, and students from the first year were seriously loaded. At times, Barbara fell asleep over her notes, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of new information. Early rises and the long drive to the institute were also exhausting. But most importantly, her childhood dream was getting closer. Unlike Barbara, Kate didn't work too hard. She often read magazines in her classes, could sleep through classes, and saw going to the institute only as an excuse to dress up. You'll be expelled after the first session, Barbara sometimes warned her careless friend. Oh, I just need a cosmetologist license, Kate said. The girls seemed to be going their separate ways, but their friendship only grew stronger. Barbara admired Kate's openness and simplicity, which she lacked, and Kate, perhaps, envied her city friend's tenacity and determination. They had fun contrasting their different personalities and views on their studies. But to get a diploma, you have to pass the exams at least satisfactorily. Barbara stopped her. I have enough knowledge for a satisfactory, Kate. The village fashionista said confidently. Kate wasn't really that lazy. She just had a different approach. Instead of cramming every day, she preferred to stay up the night before the seminar to answer without forgetting what she had read. She took notes from her roommates and kept her textbooks and manuals on the table in her room just for show. Kate was not lazy also because she immediately began to look for part-time jobs. To be more precise, they found it themselves to hand out flyers in the dormitory, or something somewhere to carry for a little money. So by the end of the semester, she was invited to work as a barista for evening shifts in a small coffee shop. Kate brewed coffee a little better than the cleaning lady, but made eyes at all the visitors and smiled. Thanks to her rustic spontaneity and simplicity, her 32 teeth left good tips, on which the girl bought cosmetics and new handbags. This rustic directness and simplicity helped her where it was more difficult for city people. Kate was not afraid to seem stupid, and it always went to her advantage. She also had her own goal, and the girl went her own way to it. Barbara always had fun with Kate. She knew the latest gossip, had a lot of funny stories to tell, and could do her friends' makeup in the bathroom before class. On one of the frosty days before the session, Barbara stood at the bus stop waiting for the bus. Several other people were crowding along with her. Time was running out, and the bus was still missing. The elderly women behind Barbara were getting louder and louder. A man in an old-fashioned fur hat, carrying a briefcase like Novoseltsev from the movie Service Romance, finally couldn't stand it and asked the driver of the next bus, "Where did the 14th route go?" "They abolished them all," he shrugged indifferently. "Now it's only a transfer to the center." Rumors that this bus would be abolished had been circulating for a long time. But as always, everything happened at the most inopportune moment. The man in the fur hat swore loudly, not embarrassing the passengers, and hurriedly began to call a cab. Clara realized that she would have to do the same to avoid being late. As luck would have it, the first pair was a seminar with a very picky professor from the Higher School of Economics who wouldn't let latecomers in. To get to the institute, Barbara gave away all her money, even scraped change from the farthest pockets. She ran into the auditorium a moment before the bell rang and, breathing loudly, plopped down on the bench next to Kate. "Where have you been?" "I was already thinking about how to get you out of school," she pounced on her friend with questions. "My bus doesn't run anymore," Barbara complained, laying out her notebook. "I don't know how I'm going to get here. It's either a detour across the city or a cab." "So you should move into my dorm," Kate said. 5 minutes and you're at school. Just remember to brush your teeth." Barbara wanted to say something against it, but suddenly realized that it wasn't a bad idea. And if she had to choose between an extra early rise and an expensive cab, Kate and the dormitory was the better option. After all, she'd wanted to live on her own for a long time. Student room fees were ridiculous. She spent more on commuting from home. And she could go to her mom's on weekends. "My roommate just moved out, so here, as they say, all the cards are aligned." Kate theatrically raised her hands to the ceiling. "You'll have to apply to the building manager, and they'll move you in no time." Barbara nodded. So much time they were wasting traveling. They could have used it for more useful things like studying, walking, and getting a good night's sleep. The superintendent had been a little nagging at Barbara when she'd given her the papers. "What are you doing here?" "I have to put up foreigners from out of town," she grumbled. The girl kept silent, knowing that she was obliged to be accommodated. The commandant once again looked at her with a keen eye, but everything was in order. Eventually she accepted the application and gave her a check-in date. As soon as they were out of the dormitory, Kate smothered Barbara in a hug so tightly that she gasped. "Yay! Yay, we're together now." Her mother took the news of her daughter's future move with enthusiasm. The mother's apartment was cozy, but cramped. Alas, even a mother's love couldn't change that fact. "Don't eat crap in there," Lexi admonished her daughter as she put towels and a new set of bedding in her bag. "And don't drink. You're the only one who's so willful," she shook her fist rather jokingly, "or that Kate, your tough friend, is going to be a bad influence on you." "She's all right," Barbara defended her friend. "She's just peculiar." A few days later, on a weekend, the girl came to the dormitory with her things. Kate was already waiting for her. She helped her to bring everything in, settle in, showed her where everything was. The room was small, but here Barbara had her own separate bed, a table, a closet, shelves, and a whole wall. All in all, not bad. The main thing was that it was a couple minutes' walk to the university, and she would get used to the rest. That evening, Barbara and Kate were walking down the hallway when a voice called out to them. "Hello, girls." A student peeked out of a nearby room. "Hi, Swan," Kate responded, tilting her head to the side as if looking at a shiny bauble. "What do you want?" "Come join us, because we're lacking female company," he said, waving his hand invitingly. "We'll feed you, give you a drink. We won't leave you with any hard feelings. It's a birthday party, after all." Barbara tugged Kate's elbow questioningly. "It's Swan from third year who's been after me since the beginning of the semester," she whispered back. "He's not a bad guy, but he's a little dorky. Do you want to go?" Barbara took another look at the guy who was urging them on. "Why not?" She shrugged her shoulders. Kate stared at her. "Tomorrow's Sunday anyway. No need to go anywhere. We'll sit around and talk, all of us. Nothing to be afraid of," she turned to Swan. "Okay, we'll be there soon." The guy glowered, gave them a thumbs up, and disappeared into the room. Barbara studied for a while, but then she thought about it. She hadn't really made friends with anyone except Kate in the 6 months she'd been at school. Sure, she'd hung out with her classmates, but it wasn't the same. Barbara's old school friends visited less and less often and wrote shorter and shorter letters, because everyone had enough to worry about. And they didn't understand why she was going to an institute across town. Kate quickly combed her hair, changed from pants to jeans, and found a decent t-shirt in the closet. Barbara didn't bother, limiting herself to brushing her hair. There were 3 guys and a girl in the room, apparently the couple of the birthday boy, tall, thin as a pole, but very hospitable. Swan, an old acquaintance, greeted the girls and introduced the company. This is Vince, the birthday boy, and his girlfriend Susan. This is Simon, the city's future medical luminary. And this is Jasper, he said, pointing his finger at a boy sitting in a chair by the window. Matthew from the journalism department. The girls were warmly welcomed and seated at the communal table. After a while, the shyness of the acquaintance evaporated without a trace. Everyone drank, ate, joked. Susan suggested playing crocodile. The boys readily moved the bed, making room. Barbara stared blankly at all the new acquaintances. Jasper was making small talk with Kate. It was obvious that he liked her, whether he was trying to hug her, picking an invisible speck off her shoulder, or whispering something in her ear. Vince and Susan had been together a long time. It was obvious from their conversation and their warmth toward each other. Barbara felt a twinge of distant envy. She'd dated a guy in high school, but he'd never treated her with such care and warmth. Simon made occasional jokes about doctors. During breaks, when his mouth wasn't busy eating, he'd already put a couple ketchup stains on his shirt. But would that stop a man with a big appetite? Matthew, the only one Jasper had introduced differently than the others, didn't fit at the table. He sat by the window with his plate in his hands. But that didn't stop the young man from collecting all the stares. He told stories, joked, asked provocative questions, and posed picturesquely. Matthew's a talker, Vince said. He's a man who's chosen his profession to talk. The party turned into an interesting argument about professions and vocations. When Matthew spoke disparagingly of medicine, comparing it to picking on people, Barbara stood up for Simon. "What's wrong with helping people?" she asked suddenly. Everyone fell silent and stared at her with interest. Matthew also looked at her. "You're not going to help them for free, are you? Or are you going to open a branch of the Mother Teresa Society?" He sarcastically parried Barbara. "I want to help first of all. I'm going into the profession because of my heart, not because it's profitable," she said. "Okay, and you need to eat. So stop covering your ambition with mercy." Matthew waved his hand at her. "Sooner or later, people will become just a means of earning money for you. But some people will earn money by talking, and others by seeing rotten teeth and other unpleasant things in the human body." "Matthew, come on. This is the 3rd year you've been arguing with us," Vince said conciliatorily. "All professions are needed, and all have their talents. Let's have a drink and play cards." Barbara gave Matthew an annoyed look, but didn't argue further so as not to offend the birthday boy. The trouble was, she liked the smug talker. Matthew had the typical flamboyant appearance, chiseled facial features, dark hair, strong charisma, and a sharp mind. Gradually, the angular conversations smoothed out and the tension he'd built up went away. The party had passed midnight when there was a knock on the door. "Shuge," Vince hissed. "Commandant." Susan appeared and, cursing everyone, quickly covered the table with a sheet. Girls and boys were hidden under beds and in closets. Everything happened so fast that hardly a fly could have flown in that time. The commandant's voice was heard, reprimanding Vince for the noise and disorder after lights out, and he did his best to show the supposedly empty room. It's like this every time, Matthew sighed, shoved into the closet with Barbara on the perfume mountain. "Auntie's here, so she'll hide everything in the closets, you idiot." The closet was cramped. Barbara felt her back resting against the guy's chest and almost stepped on his feet. For some reason, her cheeks were flaming and her tongue was confused. Matthew touched her shoulder gently as he could do while standing in a closet full of things. "I'm sorry, okay, it's my nature to pick at things." "It was rude," he said. Without turning around, Barbara replied, "Vada." She could feel the guy's guilty breath on the back of her neck. It was getting stuffy. Let's go out tomorrow. As an apology, you pick where Matthew put his hand on her forearm. The commandant let go of the last of her nagging remarks, wagged her finger, and made to leave. Goosebumps ran up and down his body. It was hot and cold at the same time. There was tension in the air again, but it was still enveloping. Come on, Barbara agreed. To the contemporary artists' exhibition at the gallery. Okay. I'll be waiting at the dormitory entrance. The closet doors swung open. So you two didn't have a fight? Vince asked. We did. We almost did. Matthew pulled away. He was the first to jump out, winking discreetly at Barbara. You okay? Why would you go out with that asshole? Kate gave the guy a hard stare. I think we're going on a date with that jerk, Barbara whispered quietly, trying to hide her red cheeks and the stupid love sparkle in her eyes. Barbara Vitalievna, you have golden hands. The grateful patient smiled goodbye and left the office. Barbara took off her gloves and nodded to herself in the mirror. She had gone to the dentist's office for moments like this, for grateful looks and sincere appreciation. Wasn't it a shame the years she'd spent studying? First 5 in medical school, then residency. 3 more years for the registry. Barbara took the robe home to wash. She should also call Kate. They were supposed to meet today for a professional holiday. Barbara threw on the coat, said goodbye to the girls at the front desk, and hurried to the store to get a cake. Kate still had a sweet tooth from university. No one was home for her yet. Kieran had warned that he would be at the agency until the evening. He'd started moonlighting there while he was still studying, and 7 years later he'd taken the editor's chair himself. But Kieran had connections with every authority in Swan, from vegetable shops to the prosecutor's office. He and Barbara had married while they were still at university, a year after they'd started their relationship in the dormitory party. Kate had convinced her that Kieran was good, of course, but he was too nosy. Mother and principal did not take the profession of journalism seriously. What kind of job is it, collecting gossip? Like plowing a factory or sowing grain, she used to say. But she was radiant when Barbara came for the weekend and raved about her boyfriend. Kieran was not what he seemed at first glance, nor what everyone else saw him as. He knew how to be caring and sensitive, and even restrained his desire to pick at everything. At the same time remained the soul of the company, a noisy lighter. Many girls openly envied Barbara and openly glared at Kieran when they appeared at the university. There's nothing to see. Kate waved her hands at them. They're not here for the ballet. Shoo. Though she had initially opposed Barbara and Kieran's relationship, she soon became an ardent defender of their peace, and was even a bridesmaid at the wedding. Not without pride, she told the guests that without her, the young couple would not have met. It might have seemed that Kate just had nothing to do, but those who thought so were wrong. She had affairs with 2 or 3 men at once. Never a dull moment in the evening. Sometimes she chose from several candidates and was not ashamed to use her natural beauty. Those problems that she herself did not want to solve suitors. That's how Kate finished her studies, not really knowing what she was studying for. She got her medical degree as a working makeup artist. She did not go to any residency, but sat in a beauty studio, having mastered in addition to makeup, hair, and other procedures. From boredom or from power, married and 6 months later divorced. Another year Kate went on dates, and then again went to the registry office. She wasn't lazy, she was just lucky. She was also never shy about doing things that others disapproved of, so she won where others gave up. Barbara sometimes thought her road was straight and quiet, where you could see all the stops and bumps from miles ahead. Kate's road, on the other hand, wriggled like a snake, either falling into potholes or going under the clouds. The important thing was that in the end, they both reached their destination. Finally. Wow. Barbara was just about to call her friend, who was almost an hour late, when she heard a commotion in the entryway and a bell ringing. Can you believe it, you bastard? Kate was indignant. The client was late, delayed me. The cabs were still running. Barbara just smiled. They hugged. It couldn't have been otherwise. Over the years, Kate had changed from a country girl with ambition into a genteel city beauty. She aspired to a brown haircut, was always with makeup, fashionably dressed. And she was more concerned about a new skirt, and going for a massage than having groceries at home. "Oh, you didn't cook?" Kate asked, as soon as she entered the kitchen and poked her nose into the pots on the stove and in the refrigerator. "I see piggies." Barbara had borscht, stuffed cabbage, and compote. She didn't chase brands and hairstyles. She dressed minimalistically and simply, but she knew how to keep things cozy and on time. "I'm Simon's boo." "I don't cook anything," Kate complained. "We all have our talents," Barbara reassured her. The casual, friendly conversation went on late into the night. It was always like this when they met. The cake was almost over, and for the third time, Barbara was making coffee. When did Kieran finally come home? The young editor was in a meeting. He'd come into the kitchen, said hello briefly, hugged his wife and retired to his room, saying he'd had a hard day. "Why is he so glum?" Kate asked, glancing at the man. "Tired," I guess. Barbara shrugged. "I didn't have to force him to sit at the table." Come on. Kate jumped up from her chair and reached for her friend's shoulder. "What's this?" She picked up her red hair with 2 long fingernails and showed it to the stunned Barbara. She stopped talking in surprise. "Maybe it was an accident," Barbara suggested. "Yeah, you can say it was blown in by the wind." Kate stared at her with her arms at her sides. "I'm a friend of men, I know how they smell. Came in tired, in someone else's hair. Just like he'd been working out." "Poor thing," Barbara grinned. "What are you implying? That he, Matthew, has moved on the room?" "I'm not implying anything yet, but it's a fact," Kate shrugged. "We need to watch him, take a closer look. And come on, maybe you had something strange going on." Barbara wondered. Her friend's suspicions had shifted the bricks of her inner fortress. Just a little, but even that was enough to make the edifice faintly shake. Matthew had replaced the father she'd been deprived of in her life. He became both friend and husband at once. For the first few years they lived soul to soul, understood each other without words, and as if a whole universe was formed in the fusion of 2 different characters. Then they experienced several crises in their relationship. There were quarrels, as with everyone, but they quickly became the past. The last year they lived very measured, but loaded professionally. Both worked hard to achieve their goals. Maybe they were socializing less. Barbara speculated aloud. "Is everything okay in bed?" Kate questioned her. "Well, maybe because of the work, maybe a little less," Barbara agreed. "There, something sticking." Kate nodded. "It's just one hair, and already there's a lot of panic." "Everything starts with a hair," said her friend with an authoritative thumbs up. "I advise you to go through the pockets of his shirt, and in the laptop." "I'm not sniffing shirts." "What the hell are you talking about?" Barbara was indignant, though subconsciously the doubt had already taken hold of her. "Go to his workplace," Kate whispered conspiratorially. "Maybe they've got a red-headed student intern there." They chatted for a while, and Kate started to get ready to go home. "Oh, I almost forgot," she said. "My salon is celebrating its anniversary. Come with your husband next week, Friday. You are my regular customer." "Of course we will," Barbara nodded. "Smell the shirts." Kate winked at her, gave her a kiss, and disappeared into the elevator. Involuntarily, Barbara began to look at her husband. Until Kate's words, she'd never thought of accusing him of cheating. Of course, it was hard to believe, but doubts crept in. One evening, Barbara did go through her husband's things. "God, what am I doing?" she asked herself when she actually sniffed his favorite Matthew shirt. It didn't smell anything suspicious. There was no foreign hair. Barbara calmed down and put Kate's words out of her mind. Kate is Kate, and my Matthew isn't like that. She had long ago accepted his job and the need to socialize with different people. Little did she know who the meeting might have been with. This is all silly. "Mish, we're all right, aren't we?" Barbara asked on the way to the cafe, not knowing why she was asking. The inner restlessness hadn't completely gone away. "Yes, why are you suddenly asking?" Matthew wondered. "You can't tell me that Kate found a hair," Barbara thought. "You've been away at work lately, and we haven't talked much." "Barbara, but you know I have a lot of things to do and a lot of responsibilities." Matthew smiled. I'll get an assistant soon and relax a little." Oh. Here we are. Kate was waiting for them at the entrance to the cafe, looking drunk and in full battle paint. She was friends with the owner of the salon and had even bought out a small share of the business, so she could invite anyone to the party. Barbara sometimes wondered where careless Kate got the money, but the mystery remained a mystery. The mini-corporate party was a lot of fun. The women's company was diluted by a few men: the owner's husband, the masseur's boyfriend, and Barbara and Kate's husbands. Barbara didn't know her friend's new husband. She had only seen him at the wedding and didn't remember where he'd come from. Simon looked frankly bored. He constantly touched his champagne glass, sighed, and took part in the general festivities very languidly. The hostess raffled off certificates for free treatments among the guests. Barbara successfully won one of them and hurried to please her husband, who went outside for a smoke. She jumped out of the door and looked around puzzled. Only Kate was outside, talking on the phone. "Have you seen Matthew?" her friend asked her. Kate put the phone away in her purse. "Of course I have. While you were participating in the raffle, your husband poured wine on his pants and went to change his clothes," she shouted. "And we have a delivery of new manicure tables. The idiots just mixed up the days. I rushed to the salon to receive, so that everything did not disrupt. Ciao. You two have fun." Kate jumped into a cab and sped away. A puzzled Barbara dialed Matthew. He confirmed that he had doused his pants, was changing, and would be back soon. "Miss me?" She heard a voice from behind her. Simon came out of the door. Barbara responded machine generously. "No." They had said hello very crumply in the first few minutes. The girl wondered why her husband had not warned her and had left so hastily. "Let's talk, shall we?" Simon kept up. "I don't know anyone here but you. There's nothing to talk about with these chickens in salons. They're all talking about manicures and new hair colors." He yawned tiredly and flicked his lighter. "Come on," Barbara agreed, realizing she was in a similar situation. Simon asked about his work, his habits, his studies, only moving on to talk about himself. He complained about Kate, overtly or covertly. Barbara knew he was drunk, but for some reason she listened. She'd never talked to someone in such a way about her friend, as if she'd been given a glimpse into a secret suitcase. "She cooks once a week, and it's impossible to eat," Simon complained. "I'm used to home-cooked food," Simon sighed. "My mom was a cook all her life. And here Ben, from morning till night, do you want borscht? Cutlets? Pie she'll buy soldiers, or say, eat dumplings, honey yuck. But at night she wears makeup until 3 o'clock. Then why did you marry her?" Cautiously switched to you, Barbara. "She's beautiful. She's a pain in the ass." I couldn't take my eyes off her. When I saw her, everything reasonable changed in my head. But now I realize you can't eat beauty alone. Simon moved closer and whispered. "I gave her money for a share in that damn salon for some reason. I thought she'd stop hanging around there and be home and earning an income. No way." Barbara felt sorry for Simon. She realized that his rose-colored glasses were broken. On the one hand, he'd seen who he'd married. On the other hand, beauty had always clouded men's judgment. "I wish I had a wife like you," Barbara Simon said, looking into her eyes. "A calm, responsible, domestic wife, ready to raise children, not plaster chickens in front of the mirror." Barbara endured and climbed out of Simon's palms, who had already managed to get a grip on her fingers. "I don't think this is a good idea," the girl cut him short. "It's time for us to go back inside." She turned and walked quickly into the cafe. Her heart was pounding frantically. There was bewilderment and awkwardness in her mind. Barbara sat down in her seat at the table and poured half a glass of wine. Should she tell Kate what had happened? Complaints, harassment, and innuendo. Kate would start questioning him. They'll fight. They'll have to rehash the whole thing. No, let them deal with their own problems. Barbara sipped her wine and reached for a sandwich. For some reason, she felt very bad. She wanted to hug Kieran. He'd disappeared for some reason. She called. Her husband answered that he was almost there, but he was stuck in traffic. Finally, he walked into the cafe in jeans and a t-shirt. About 10 minutes later, a panting Kate burst in. She was desperately arguing on the phone with someone. What kind of idiots are these? This isn't a company, it's a silent horror. Kate threw the phone with force on the table next to her. Not only did they show up on the wrong day, but they almost hurt me. She pointed to a barely visible bruise on her elbow and an abrasion on her forearm. I'm sorry it took so long. Barbara Kieran hugged her from behind. The traffic would drive you crazy. Why didn't you warn me? Barbara asked. I was standing in the middle of the hall with, pardon me, wet pants. Kieran waved his hands guiltily. I didn't have time to talk. I hurried to the car and rushed to change my pants. Kate continued to murmur and fuss nearby. Barbara calmed down a little when she felt her husband's hand on her arm. At the other end of the table, Simon sat silent and glared at her through the wall of a clear glass. Several days passed. Barbara was finishing up her work at the clinic. Her mood was good. The last 8-year-old patient had been a delight to her with his bravery and resilience. He even hugged the doctor's aunt goodbye. And under his mom's proud gaze, embarrassedly said thank you. Of course, Barbara could not just let the little hero out of the office and handed him a brand new toothbrush, which was left by the brand representative for promotional purposes. The young doctor had already said goodbye to all her colleagues and was standing at the door when the phone in her pocket rang. It was Kate. Help me out, come model, heard her voice in the phone. My student and I need to practice, and the model is sick, the bastard. Now? Barbara was surprised. Yes, it's urgent, Kate begged. Okay, I'll be right there. Barbara hung up the phone. She often helped her friend out. It was easy and pleasant. After all, she always came home with her makeup and hair done, and Kate's training was never disrupted. It took Barbara about half an hour to get to the salon. She was already waiting, sat in a chair, and under the popular tracks of the radio air Kate and her student began to work. The friend was scattered in another gratitude and scolded the irresponsible student model, who did not come. When the work was done and the student went home, the makeup artist offered Barbara to stay and have a cup of coffee. It turned out very favorably, said her friend, looking at the makeup. She's a smart girl. Maybe something good will come out of her. Barbara clapped her eyelashes theatrically. She turned to one side or the other. At the same time, she caught a glimpse of the old manicure and tables. I thought you said your tables were going to be replaced? She stared questioningly at her makeup artist friend. Where are they? They turned out to be defective. We sent them back. The makeup artist waved her hand. What, all at once? Barbara wondered. They all had scratched countertops. I told you, those idiot movers were banging them against each other like crazy. The makeup artist waved her hand. Pull the brushes. Fucking detectives. They only spoiled our holiday and frayed our nerves. Did they hit you with the tables too? Barbara nodded at the greenish bruise on the makeup artist's elbow. Yeah, the makeup artist didn't even look at her arm. They opened the door. As if to my home, I was sealed in for company. Friends finished their coffee and long ago switched to another topic, when the makeup artist, who was scrolling through the news feed on her phone, suddenly exclaimed, Larchik, look. She shoved a machine with a picture open on the screen to Barbara's nose. The girl looked at the picture and froze. On the photo was the entire staff of the agency where her husband worked. The guys were holding some certificates in their hands. Apparently another award from their superiors. But another thing was interesting. Next to her husband stood a young red-haired girl. Aha, shouted her friend triumphantly. And I told you to frame. I'd say so, Barbara said, looking at the photograph. I felt sick to my stomach. The nasty feeling from the conversation with her friend and her husband resurfaced again. That's from finding the red hair, said the makeup artist friend. It's okay, we exposed him. She clenched her hand into a fist. If anything, we'll be the first to file for divorce. What divorce? Barbara jumped up. Her face was burning. It's not clear yet. It's clear as day, her friend said authoritatively, folding her arms across her chest. Your husband's on the prowl. We've got to go over there and rip that redhead's hair out. Barbara clutched her temples with her hands. I don't believe in this nonsense. Okay, agreed the makeup artist. We'll watch him very carefully this week. Men always leave their fingers in the details. Barbara nodded. She wanted to hint to her friend about her boyfriend's behavior, but she didn't. She could say too much out of resentment, especially since the makeup artist was just drawing her own conclusions, a bit obsessive. But so far there was no one to take offense at or for. Barbara's husband was behaving normally. The makeup artist began to surreptitiously follow her friend's husband, something she normally never did. Until that day, Barbara thought that there was no point in restricting the freedom of a partner, forbidding something, scandals or jealousy scenes. She had realized this in her student days. Although she loved her husband very much, admired him as a man and a person. The more you control, the higher the probability of the opposite effect, she pondered. And to arrange emotional swings with yelling at her husband is a noisy and dangerous task. Scenes and emotions are enough for him at work. At home he wants peace. He said so himself. During the day, the young editor, like a chameleon, adjusted to anyone who came into his office, and in the evening at home he wanted to be himself. Feeling like a delinquent schoolgirl, Barbara rummaged through her husband's backpack, his notebook while he was in the shower. On the pages of the notebook, she found a list of phone numbers and women's names. In his jacket pocket, a strange pink-colored pen. Her heart pounded loudly, echoing in her ears like it had been covered with a bucket. What are you doing? The husband stood in the doorway, staring at his wife in amazement. Barbara froze with the evidence she had found in her hands. Are you accusing me of something? Kieran folded his arms across his chest. What is it? Barbara jabbed her finger at the list of numbers. Are these the candidates for the assistant position? Her husband shrugged indifferently. I was interviewing last week. I wrote everyone down here. What? I wrote these down. Kieran waved a pink pen in the air. First with mine. Then I ran out of paste and Stacy lent me her writing utensils. What's the problem? Why are you going through my stuff? Kieran glanced around at the slight mess on the desk. His nostrils were dilating. Barbara felt like a fool. She muttered something under her breath, slipped the notebook and pen to her husband, and left for the kitchen. His explanations were convincing, but the worm of paranoia continued to gnaw its way through her thoughts. Barbara crushed her whiskey with her hands and sat down at the table in the kitchen. She grabbed her phone and texted Kate about what had happened. The makeup artist didn't believe her friend's husband's excuses and offered to follow up with him just in case. Barbara looked at her schedule, figured something out, and texted back. Do it. Where? She went to bed late. Kieran was already on his 10th nap when she finally settled down. Before doing so, Barbara had spent a long time gazing into her sleeping husband's face, trying to find answers to her questions in him. In the morning, she got ready, pretended nothing had happened, walked Kieran to work, and waited for Kate. Her friend arrived just as Kieran rolled out of the yard. Dunkate's voice was filled with a poorly concealed excitement, as if she'd been waiting a long time for permission. I have a choice. Look, Barbara looked at her. Put your seatbelt on in the car. Well, you might not like what you see if you see anything, Kate corrected herself, shrugging. But I'd rather not see anything, of course. He's gotten kind of distant, Barbara murmured as they caught up with Kieran on the road and pulled a few cars ahead of them. He seemed fine, but something was wrong. That's how it starts, Kate nodded, gazing down the road. First they're in love, and then they start lying. They can't fool our feminine instincts. Did your previous husband cheat on you? Barbara suddenly blurted out for some reason. Kate jerked faintly at the wheel, so caught off guard by the question. Sami, was he cheating? Very likely, she said uncertainly. But I didn't care. I went on dates. I realized I was sick of Sammy. I wish I'd told him when I'd filed for divorce in bed. Aren't you afraid that Simon might cheat on you? Barbara was so emotional she could barely contain the urge to tell the truth. Simon? Please. Kate waved her hand, instantly relaxed. He's head over heels in love with me, like a dog, always waiting. Is he that in love, Barbara muttered to herself so Kate wouldn't hear. They pulled into the parking lot outside Kieran's work. His car was already there. There was a long ambush ahead. Kate promptly ran to the nearest stall for coffee and scones. Napping in the car took until lunchtime. Kate nudged Barbara in the shoulder as Kieran came out of the agency with the red-haired girl from the photo. They got into the car and got ready to drive out. "Let's go, lovebirds. We'll get them now," Kate muttered excitedly, twisting the steering wheel. Barbara watched her husband's car with bated breath. She recognized the girl in the photo. Kieran had said it was his assistant. But was it just that? The answer to that question loomed somewhere on the horizon. The editor and her companion made a trip to the city's utility and stationery store. On the whole, there were no provocative moments, except for opening the door for the girl. She carried a folder with documents, sometimes asking Kieran something or answering the phone. He hardly ever took his eyes off the phone, even while driving. "Yeah, he's holding the door for you," just in case Kate noticed Kieran's gesture, almost mockingly. "He always does that," Barbara replied, following her husband with her eyes. "Look, why don't you call him right now?" Kate suggested. "Ask him what he's doing and see what the answer is." Barbara dialed the number and waited. Kieran's phone was busy, but he switched the call almost immediately and picked up. "Hi, did you pick up lunch?" she blurted out. "Hello? No, I'm eating in the cafeteria." "Don't worry," her husband answered in a completely calm voice. "All right," Barbara stretched out. "How's the day? Are you socializing for work?" "Yes," came the reply. "Why are you calling?" No reason, Barbara lied, suspecting that her husband had suspected something. "I'll see you tonight. Bye." Kate listened to the conversation with her arms folded across her chest. He didn't say he was traveling with a woman. She waggled her eyebrows expressively. "He's hiding, all right." Her wooden confidence pierced the last shield of doubt in Barbara's chest. Why the hell does he even need an assistant? Kate snapped her hands together in indignation. It was like he'd spent 2 years cooking and doing everything himself. And here, all of a sudden, the ambition of the head of the brain. "I don't know," Barbara said, staring blankly out the window. "Tired, I guess." "Yeah, from work or from his wife," Kate said wryly. Kate drove home, leaving Barbara alone to deal with the aftermath of the evening. "Are you white or red, drinking?" Kate asked mischievously before leaving. That evening, Kieran found the 2 drunken girlfriends at home. Barbara couldn't get Kate out of the house for about an hour. She asked for a drink for a nightcap. Then she was hugging. Then she lost something in her bag. Finally, Simon arrived and took his raging wife himself. He cast an interested and questioning glance at Barbara, and they left. At that moment, her husband seemed to Barbara the best and most innocent. She fell dreamily asleep, hugging her pillow, whispering something with only her lips. Kieran sat in the chair and waited for his wife to fall asleep. He did not scold her, did not lecture her. He only set the alarm clock, put a couple of pain pills on the table, and put a glass of water. Then he went out, hesitating briefly in the doorway, as if in doubt. But the second confusion lasted only a moment. The man looked at the sleeping Barbara, nodded to himself, and closed the bedroom door. After that evening, Barbara became nervous and irritable. She began to be late for work. For the first time, Barbara snapped at a patient who drove to her from across town. "Barbara, why don't you take a vacation?" The receptionist girls at the front desk asked sympathetically. "Can I take a vacation?" the doctor replied, wrinkling her forehead tensely. She was beginning to notice a cooling in her and Kieran's relationship. He hugged her dryly. He forgot the usual little things, or he dropped her calls and returned them himself. Barbara remembered the way the other female students had looked at him during their studies. Kieran had always stood out. He was passionate, charismatic, had a great sense of humor, and a sharp mind. Next to him, she sometimes felt she was falling short. Over the years, Kieran has not lost any of his appeal, and even became brighter. "You've got a paycheck today. Go to the mall, buy yourself something, a dress, shoes, and the mood will improve," advised a colleague, Barbara. It was a good idea. In all the commotion, she had almost forgotten that it was the height of summer and that she didn't have to be cramped in stupid jeans and the infamous t-shirts. Barbara called Kate and suggested that they go shopping together after work. But her friend cited busyness and declined. At the mall, the windows were full of sales and posters, mannequins towering between the rows of clothes. Barbara remembered the pants and styles of dresses Kate had recommended to her the day before and began to walk along the racks. After choosing a few options, she went to the fitting rooms. What a pleasant surprise. She heard behind her as she came out to assess her outfit in the large mirror in front of the booths. Barbara turned around and saw Simon. The man had wandered into the mall, apparently for the same reason I had. A closet update, she thought. Well, this is a surprise, Barbara grumbled. Hello, Simon. The dress fits perfectly. The boy gave her a thumbs up. Take it, don't hesitate. This time he was fresh and had a positive attitude. Old memories that had lived along with his appearance slid unpleasantly down her back. Barbara, I wanted to apologize, Simon began, putting his hands behind his head shyly. I got drunk in that cafe because I was nervous and tired. I was talking nonsense. I'm sorry I acted like a total asshole. Barbara was surprised, pleasantly surprised. It happened, she said. What are you doing here? She glanced at the store, as if to confirm the question. I closed the deal nervously, exhaled at work, and decided to buy myself a long-standing dream. I wanted a computer. Simon nodded at the bag from the hardware store. And the new jeans were a bonus. Barbara looked at the jeans appraisingly. Don't think twice about getting them too. She smiled slightly. Even this sudden company in Simon's face was good for her for some reason. Maybe it distracted her from her obsessive thoughts. Maybe she needed a counselor, or maybe it was something else. Kate's all worked up, and she won't come with me, he said as they left the store. Busy with me today, too, Barbara confirmed. How about some coffee? Or was there something else you wanted to buy? Barbara thought that the underwear shopping would have to be postponed, and nodded in agreement, approving the coffee idea. In the cafeteria, she tried to pay for it herself, but Simon was the first to arrive and put a fragrant drink and a small dessert in front of her. Barbara hadn't ordered the latter. Oh, come on. As a friend of a best friend, Simon said, we're practically related. He didn't have time to say anything before he heard a text message from the bank. Why? Simon stared sourly at Barbara, looking at the balance on the card. Almost, but not related, she commented briefly. They chatted, then went back down to the shopping floors and wandered for a long time, picking out one pretty thing or another. Barbara felt that she was enjoying Simon's company. He didn't play the fool like he had in the cafe, but was cheerful and relaxed. At the same time, he talked about all sorts of funny situations at work, reminisced about old friends and years of schooling. There was even room for a story about Simon's childhood in the village and his happy vacations. Listening to all this, Barbara did the most important thing: distracted herself from obsessive thoughts about her husband's love. Barbara realized it was time to go home. The time was approaching evening. She hailed a cab as they stood at the entrance to the mall. Thanks for the company on the shopping trip, Barbara smiled as the cab pulled up. Thank you for the pleasant walk. Maybe we could do it again sometime. Simon opened the cab door for her. This probably isn't the right thing to do, Barbara said. Simon gave her a quick peck on the cheek and said, Well, you're a big girl. It's time to get your priorities straight. Barbara drove home. Stunned, outraged, all the emotions of the last few days were mixed up in her. Resentment toward her husband, worry about their personal life, irritation, and in all of it, there were sparks of hints from Simon. It's wrong. It's not right that she's having coffee with Kate's best friend's husband, who's making ambiguous innuendos to her for the second time. Why? Well, of course she knows why. She knows she loves Kieran too. She knew that she valued Kate as a friend and a loved one. And she knew she wasn't ready to go along with what Simon was veiledly offering her. Plain and simple. But then why was she flattered by his attention? Wasn't it compensation for a grudge from Kieran? How long had it been since he'd spent nearly half of his day off with her? The more Barbara thought about it, the more the questions became, leading her down a dead end. Tomorrow I'll talk to Kieran straight, Barbara decided, and tell Kate the truth about her husband. That will be the proper prioritization. The next day, Barbara had few patience, so she got off early after work. On the way, a nervous Kieran called her and asked her to bring her work phone, which she had forgotten at home. On the way, she thought about the best words to say to her friend and her husband. She decided to start with the first one. She dialed Kate's number and proposed to meet in the evening. The makeup artist happily replied that she agreed and even asked if she should dress up in front of her. "No, we'll just hang out," was the reply. As Barbara entered the apartment, she heard Kieran's work phone ringing. She picked it up near the mirror in the hallway and glanced at the screen absently. There were about 10 missed calls, some news reports. Greg, Barbara mumbled as she glanced at the call sheets on her smartphone. She was already getting into a cab when a text message sent around 1 o'clock in the morning caught her eye. "Missed you, my affectionate boss." Looking forward to tomorrow, Barbara felt as if she had been doused with cold water. There it was. Here were her suspicions. Here, in her hands, on the screen of her husband's phone, tears came to her eyes. Her nose crinkled and her throat was filled with rage and jealousy. Barbara caught her gaze in the rearview mirror and was stunned. She was looking at an angry and deceived woman, hungry for revenge and justice. All plans to talk to her husband were forgotten at that moment. "The boss." Then Barbara whispered, clutching the phone so tightly that it nearly cracked. The cab driver involuntarily glanced at the passenger. He instinctively sensed that something was going on behind him. The only thing the girl managed to do before her jealousy finally drowned her was to write down the number from which the text message had come. Barbara burst into the agency's office with flaming cheeks. The staff said hello to her, but the girl didn't hear them. She yanked Kieran's office door open to the astonished stares, but it wouldn't budge. "Kieran Sergeyevich isn't here. He's at lunch," said a fellow practicing journalism student timidly. "What's going on here?" he asked, being the first to catch Barbara's furious glare. "We'll wait for him here," she said. Barbara stared angrily at the empty assistant's chair next to the office and plopped down in it. Tapping her fingers expectantly on the tabletop, she felt a mixture of fear and bewilderment from the entire office. Someone had apparently called Kieran on the sly, and he'd rushed in a couple minutes later. "Did you have a good meal, love?" Barbara said sarcastically, getting up from her chair and shoving the phone screen with the text message angrily up his nose. At the same time, she glared angrily at Stacy, who was frozen in the doorway behind the chief with a stack of papers. "Barbara, what's the concert?" Kieran questioned, trying to lead his wife into the office. "Come on, let's talk quietly." Barbara broke out of her husband's arms and expressively raised her hand with the phone, showing it to the whole office. "No, why? I want everyone to know what a wonderful man you are," she emphasized the word wonderful. "A decent boss and a faithful husband." Kieran clutched his head, ashamed of his wife. "And you," Barbara pointed her finger at Stacy, Kieran's assistant, "should be ashamed of yourself for messing around with another man's husband." "Barbara, stop it." Kieran grabbed his wife in an armful and dragged her forcefully into his office. Let me go, you traitor." Barbara lashed out, hitting her hand on the door. Angry, Kieran sat his wife in a chair and, looming over her, asked, "Here, even if there's such urgency, why this show-off? What are you trying to accomplish?" Barbara looked at him with eyes red with rage and tears. She poked her husband in the face again with the work phone with the message. "How do you explain this? Sleeping with your young assistant? It's all clear. The old wife is no longer honored. You've gone completely insane." Kieran rubbed the bridge of his nose and exhaled. Obviously, someone got the wrong number in the heat of correspondence. "I even know who that redhead you come home with in your hair." "God, you have nothing better to do than look for other people's hair on my shirts." Kieran rolled his eyes. "Find something more productive to do. And Stacy has a fiancé, for your information." "You call your Stacy's number, and we'll see if she's wrong," Barbara demanded with clenched fists. Everything inside her was churning with rage, responding with a new wave to every phrase of her husband, her back, cheeks, and forehead burning. Kieran picked up his work smartphone and pressed the speakerphone during a call. The electronic voice of the answering machine came through the receiver. It rang several times, but to no avail. "That doesn't prove anything," Barbara said. "Barbara, go home. Please stop embarrassing me in front of my subordinates," Karan asked in a very firm, quiet voice, turning away to the window. The girl felt that her claims were being ignored, that it was as if everyone was laughing out loud at her without being embarrassed about it. Why? Why did it say the word boss? She threw back at Kiran, grabbing the doorknob. "I have no idea." "As if there weren't enough chiefs in Swan Town," Kiran replied without turning around. Barbara left her husband's office, and a dozen prying eyes stared at her. She walked briskly down the corridor without looking at anyone. On her way out of the building, she saw Stacy standing by the parking lot. She was being hugged and apparently comforted by some guy. Barbara froze for a moment, and then a wave came over her, burning her from the inside out. The tears she had been holding back for so long rushed from her eyes. It's okay, Kate said, counting the drops of valerian. "Men are like that, tricky, but you don't have to cry about it. Appreciate your dignity." She handed Barbara a glass of water and a sedative to a shuddering Barbara. Kate arrived as soon as she heard her friend's unintelligible voice on the phone, mixed with crying. "Kate, I've embarrassed him," she took the glass with shaking hands. "And him and myself. I'm anticipating the news on their website. Editor's ex-wife breaks into office. God, what a shame." Barbara was in tears again. She hadn't been able to calm down for about an hour. "Well," Kate said, "at least you'll be remembered. Why do you have to go there anyway?" "I'm such an idiot." Barbara leaned into her friend's shoulder. "We're all a little bit stupid." Kate put her hands on her head. "Why did you call me this afternoon?" Barbara realized that she couldn't take another confrontation today. "I just wanted to chat," she said. "Maybe go shopping?" "Well, we're not going anywhere now." No amount of foundation can hide your puffy eyes. "I'm an expert," Kate said, raising her finger to the ceiling, which made Barbara smile a little. "What are you going to do about Kiran?" "I don't believe in random texting," she persisted. "I don't know, maybe I'm really paranoid." Barbara slumped into the back of the couch and stared at the ceiling. "If that's the case, you should apologize." "I'd still fight it," Kate persisted. "It was reckless of him to sleep with his almost secretary. It's like a joke situation. There's someone else here for sure." "I'll talk to him if I can," Barbara exhaled. For some reason, she dialed the number she had copied from her husband's phone again, and once again it responded with the monotonous muttering of an electronic voice. Kiran came home late that evening, but Barbara waited for him. Her husband looked at her glumly and, without a word, left for the shower. "Kiran." "I'm sorry." Barbara waited for him in the room. The man walked past her, shook his head. "I'll forgive you, Barbara. Except that my reputation is ruined by this tantrum today. There'll be whispers behind my back, and I've given Stacy the day off." "I was wrong." Kiran. Barbara sighed sadly, sitting down on the floor. "I'm so ashamed." "I was so ashamed." Kiran sat down on the other side of the sofa. "You've turned into some kind of paranoiac looking for hair in my things, sniffing around for some stupid mistake by a stranger, throwing tantrums. Damn her." "It just seemed to me that our relationship had grown cold," Barbara murmured quietly. "When it seems, my dear, it's customary to be baptized," said Kiran. "Have you decided to play the jealous wife?" The idea had failed. "But," Kate said. Barbara began. "Would you and Kate be in the yellow ward together with such ideas?" Her husband came at her again. "She's listening to someone who can't see what's under her nose. But she advises you, and God forbid she herself has a husband who walks left and right." Suddenly Kiran cut himself off half-phrased. It seemed that he had said something unnecessary, and now he was trying to take it back. Barbara's ears perked up. She squeezed the bridge of her nose with her fingers and covered her eyes, trying to calm down. "And anyway, don't talk to Kate about any of that nonsense. She's a bad influence on you," he said at last. Kiran stood up and left the room, signaling that the conversation was over. Barbara was left sitting alone in the dark, confused and full of doubt. Kiran knows something about Simon. but he keeps quiet. Male solidarity. Why is he suddenly so set against Kate? She thought. Barbara paid no attention to her husband's apparent coldness and his unwillingness to address the problem and forgive her. A week passed. Life went on as usual. Angie, the head doctor of the clinic, informed Barbara that she and 2 other young dentists were going to a 3-day conference in another city. The girl was even a little relieved at this turn of events. It might help to take her mind off her worries, although outwardly Barbara had no reason to worry. Her husband was friendly to her. Kate still called and chatted nonstop about everything. The patients hadn't diminished, but the appearance of well-being hid Kieran's frightening coldness, the fading passion, the exhausting work that took up all her energy. Barbara could never find the strength to talk to her friend about her husband. She had no proof other than her own suspicions. I should get my family in order first, she thought. Kieran agreed that the trip would be good for his wife, and even bought her a train ticket. Go have a rest, listen to intelligent people, relax and get rid of all the nonsense from your head, he told Barbara, while she was packing a travel bag. The train swayed gently on the tracks. Barbara rarely rode trains, and every time she did, it was a surprise. Her colleagues were arguing animatedly. Nearby, glasses rattled under the clatter of the wheels. Maybe Kieran's right. I am overly suspicious. We've been together since we were 18, and there's never been any cause for jealousy, Barbara thought, looking out the window at the fir trees that flashed by at the station. And how many girls at the university were hanging around him? I didn't care much about it then. Yes, it was Kate's way of panicking herself and others. Whether it was the monotonous rocking that chased away the bad thoughts or the atmosphere of the trip, Barbara was in a pleasant mood. She laid her head down on the pillow that smelled of iron and fresh fabric. I'll be back and we'll definitely go to Grandma's in Utah, Barbara decided, and closed her eyes. Training in the company of the sun and sea really did the girl good. In the morning, she and her colleagues listened to seminars of experienced doctors and presentations of new materials, and in the afternoon they went to the beach to sunbathe and swim. The sea climate and fresh air seemed to erase the worries from her mind. Barbara thought about how she would return home, how she would tell Kieran about the trip, how then the 2 of them would go to the place where malachite was mined. It's a shame Kate isn't with me, the girl thought, watching the waves. She said she hadn't been to the sea for a couple of years. Barbara really wanted to share the peacefulness with people close to her. After all, co-workers are only co-workers. On the 3rd day, the organizers said that the last speaker would not be able to come due to illness, apologized to the participants, and announced the closing of the training. Barbara decided not to stay another day in the hotel with the others, but bought a ticket for the same day and went home. That'll be a surprise for Kieran. I'll arrive early. And with a tan too, she smiled as she looked out the window at the sea. The train arrived at its destination early in the morning. On the trip, Barbara had a nice chat with a neighbor and her 9-year-old grandson. Granny treated the girl to fruit and enjoyed listening to her stories about her work, remembering her own youth. The morning city was just waking up. The air washed by the night rain was not as warm as at the sea, and even a little fresh. Outside the cab window were still sleepy alleys and early joggers in the alleys. The first rays of sunshine dispersed the mist, the remnants of which played in the puddles, and the drops glistened on the bushes and tree branches. The cab driver helped Barbara unload her bag, wished her a good day, and drove off after the new passengers. She thought about how she would now go up to the apartment, go in quietly, and get into bed with a sleeping Kieran. How nice that today was her husband's day off and they could sleep through lunch together, then make coffee and talk about their upcoming trip. Barbara quietly turned the key in the lock so as not to wake Kieran. Quietly, she entered the apartment and, barely seeing the familiar hallway, was taken aback. All the good mood she'd brought with her from the sea had gone down and shattered into tiny pieces. Her heart was pounding like the wheels of the train that had brought her back here. There were shoes lying in the hallway that she would recognize out of 100. They'd bought them together last year and picked up the last pair in town. The shoes had been Kate's. At the mirror, however, Barbara saw her keys and an equally all too familiar car key fob. For a moment, a naive, childish thought crept into her head: what if something had happened, and Kate had come to ask for help? But that thought was immediately smothered under the pressure of the obviousness of what was happening. From the bedroom, Barbara heard soft voices. It seemed to her that her heart was pounding so loudly that the neighbors could hear it. The girl crept quietly to the door and froze, listening to what was going on behind it. "I almost talked him into leaving," Stacy completely said, a familiar female voice. "The divorce will be finalized as soon as the official deal is done," Kieran's voice replied. Same day, the woman confirmed. "And when are you going to file the papers?" There was a sigh. "I think." The idea of a fake affair had failed. Barbara entered the apartment before she could turn the key. There were shoes lying in the hallway that she would have recognized out of 100. They'd bought them with Kieran last year and picked up the last pair in town. The shoes were Kate's. By the mirror lay her keys and a familiar car fob. For a moment, a naive thought crept into my head that maybe something had happened and Kate had come to ask for help. But that thought vanished immediately under the weight of the obviousness of what was happening. Quiet voices came from the bedroom. Barbara crept to the door and froze, listening. "I almost talked him into leaving," Stacy completely said, a familiar female voice. "We'll get the divorce finalized as soon as the official deal is done," Kieran's voice replied. The same day, the woman confirmed. "And when are you going to file the documents?" There was a sigh. "I think." "The fake treason idea failed," Kieran said with annoyance. "It failed because someone left their work phone at home," a woman's voice interrupted reproachfully. "I've been working her as hard as I can. A little more, and she would have filed for divorce herself. And we would have gotten away with it. And now it is necessary either to speak in the forehead or something else to think up." "Head on," came the answer after a pause. "It's a pity. I don't like her as a woman, but as a human being I pity her. And to make a show is not pitiful." With a chuckle said the interlocutor. "The lesser of two evils. My choice," the man's voice said with a chuckle. Barbara clamped her hands over her mouth, feeling the corners of her eyes moisten. A wave of cold rolled down her back. Her cheeks flared with heat, and her throat felt like it was being squeezed in the grip of an invisible hand. The realization came in pieces, each one more repulsive than the last, burning away all the good inside like acid. "Kieran, you and I met back in college." Kate's voice was quiet, ingratiating. "But you were too right then, and I was too stupid. But if it had worked, there wouldn't have been all these years, divorces, other husbands, and everything would be easier now. We'd be living abroad somewhere by now. If it works out, it will," Kieran confirmed. "We'll manage the salon and the agency remotely." Barbara felt her tears wet her shirt, leaving a hot, wet trail on her chest. "When we're gone, maybe they'll do something about the marriage thing." Kate laughed from behind the door. "I've seen the way he looks at her, it's perfect. He likes dumplings and borscht and soap operas at night. She's never been as good as you." "She loves her job and doesn't like herself very much," said Kieran. "We live like neighbors. I'm tired of the homegirl who always has everything planned. I feel like an old man around her. I want something different." "I know what you want," Kate said. "Family. Freedom." There was a commotion. Barbara sat against the wall outside the door, shaking with shame, pity, disgust, resentment, and a sense of betrayal by the two people she thought closest to her after her mother. The cold hands of reality finally closed around her throat. She jumped up and flung herself out of the apartment. Out into the street, into the morning. Barbara ran and ran, fleeing from the shame and embarrassment she had lived in for so many years. She was disgusted with her own existence and wanted to forget, to erase her memory. To go back 10 years, to not reach out, to find others, to send the smug Kieran away. Every year that passed felt like it was whipping her in the back, leaving deep wounds and causing the pain to grow worse and worse. Tears covered her eyes, everything was cloudy and barely recognizable. She stopped to catch her breath and ran again. Passers-by heard her screams, but Barbara neither saw nor heard them. She wanted to hide from this vile feeling, from herself. "Girl, look out." It was the last scrap of reality that imprinted itself on her memory before pain and darkness consumed her. The peaceful sounds of a squeak snapped Barbara out of oblivion. She thought irritably at first, "What's that nasty squeak that sounds like the trills of an electronic alarm clock from the 90s?" Her eyes opened with difficulty. Her body felt like absorbent cotton. My right leg felt like it was made of stone and wouldn't move. My entire right side responded with a painful tingling sensation when I tried to turn around on the bed. My head was buzzing. "Good morning. You're finally awake," Barbara, the woman in the white coat, greeted her. Barbara looked around and only then realized that she was in a hospital bed. "What happened to me?" She looked at the leg in a cast sticking out from under the blanket. "You were hit by a car," the doctor said, looking at the paperwork. "I'm surprised you got away with a broken leg, a mild concussion, and moderate bruising. Others in such cases are put together in pieces. Were you born with your shirt on? The family will be happy to know you're on the mend." "Not all the family." Barbara turned her back to the wall. "Will someone come to call your relatives?" The doctor asked. "Tell my husband that I was hit by a car and died. I can't go back. I don't want to see him again, and I don't want to see her ever again." "I beg you," Barbara said without turning around. The doctor shook her head. "If they come, don't let them in my room," Barbara added. The hospital was dreary, but the walls with the Red Cross seemed to distract her from the painful thoughts of what had happened. The physical pain didn't seem to bother her as much as the tearing of her soul. The mother rushed to the hospital half an hour after the call. She was first upset, then cursing, then crying at her daughter's bedside. Barbara told her everything she had heard that morning. Lexi left her daughter's room, slipped the nurses boxes of candy, and threatened to complain to the head doctor, ordering her not to let anyone with names beginning with the letters M and K see her daughter. Barbara blocked the numbers of her husband and the lying friend. She asked her mother and a coworker friend to pick up her belongings from her husband's apartment when he was away. Doctors said rehabilitation would take about 3 weeks. The fracture would finally heal in 3 months. One day there was a knock on the room door. Barbara thought it was one of the staff, although they usually didn't bother to knock. "Come in," she shouted, not taking her eyes off the magazine her mother had brought. "Hello, Barb," came a familiar voice. Simon stood in the doorway with a bouquet of flowers, and when she saw Barbara's robe thrown over her shoulders, she had mixed feelings. Seeing her ex-girlfriend's husband reminded her of what had happened. On the other hand, it was as if he had nothing to do with it. "You don't know how hard it is for me to get here," the man complained, sitting down on the edge of the bed. "They're practically checking IDs to get to you." "That's my request," Barbara nodded. "Why are you hiding from someone?" Simon joked. "Maybe I am the girl," confirmed. Simon stared at her in surprise. His eyes were filled with question and incomprehension. Barbara exhaled and decided to tell him. She remembered everything Kate at the Institute, her consumerist attitude toward men, and the hypocrisy of her friend. Simon listened with his mouth open. "I don't want you to fall victim to their game. Divorce soon and don't listen to any pleas. A salon? Don't you dare buy one. Kate is using you and has been using you," Barbara finished. "How do you know that?" Simon asked, stunned, not believing his ears. They talked about it for a long time. She asked him not to tell anyone where she was or what was wrong with her, and not to do anything stupid that would ruin his life. Toward the end, as Simon was leaving, he asked, "Barb, tell me, do I have a chance?" "Not now," she shook her head. "I want to be alone. Maybe in the future. Maybe." "I understand. Get well soon. And I'll come by, if you don't mind," Simon nodded. "Come," she blinked, showing her agreement. Time passed differently in the country than it did in the city. It's measured and quiet. The hustle and bustle are alien to those who are used to getting up to the crowing of the rooster. A light frost touched the rowan berries, which shone against the snow with bright lights. The sun disappeared behind the horizon. The fresh snow had not yet been trampled by anyone's feet and paws. "Granddaughter, there's a letter for you," Angie shouted as she came in, waving the envelopes. "Thank you," Barbara shouted from the kitchen. She was making a simple breakfast for herself and her grandmother. "It's been a long time since I've seen a letter," Angie said, sitting down on a stool. "You young people are all on your gadgets, and you've given up writing." She handed Barbara an envelope. She took a quick glance at the sender's name and decided to read it later. After she recovered, Barbara went straight to her grandmother's house in Swan Village. She could not stay in the city, where every street reminded her of the betrayal and shame she had experienced. The girl quit her job, took care of other minor matters. She made her mother her representative in the divorce proceedings, so she wouldn't have to face Kieran again. Out of sight, out of mind, her mother said as she saw her off. Go as you like, and come back as you like. Just call often, her mother said to Barbara before she left. It was quiet in Swan Village. There the pain began to subside and gradually recede. Time was doing its work, healing the wounded soul. Her mother didn't talk about Kieran and the divorce, only promised to tell her when it was over. The envelope had Simon's address and name on it. How he knew where to find her remained a mystery. Barbara ran her eyes cursorily over the lines. Simon had written about the divorce, about leaving Kate nearly destitute. That part of the letter she deliberately skipped. Dear Barb, I realize I'm probably an extra person in your life, but since that night at the hospital you haven't left my mind. I've made a lot of mistakes and missed a lot of chances, but I don't want to let you go. The girl paused, listening to herself. Something faintly trembled in her after those words. I'm willing to wait as long as you say. I hope for an answer. Simon. Barbara folded the letter, tucked it away in an envelope, and began to twirl it in her hands. If she had still had doubts at the hospital, she knew for sure now. Angie came into the room, thinking of what to say to him. She looked at her granddaughter's focused face. I think old suitors aren't invited into a new life, Barbara smiled at her grandmother, tearing open the envelope. She tossed the scraps into the trash can and looked out the window. Grandma, the neighbor's probably here to ask about Vince again. She's so restless, she's already got her hands full. The older woman nodded. They're all worried about Sami. Suddenly, Matthew hears a knock on the door and sees a freezing stranger with a baby in her arms. Right after she got her diploma, Anastasia rushed off to Unity City. Didn't even stay for graduation. Not because her classmates had done something to offend her. She wanted to start a new adult life as soon as possible. My mom kept telling me to. Anastasia, where are you running to? But at least stay for graduation. You've been with the guys for 11 years. Don't you want to say goodbye? You'll leave tomorrow. One day won't solve anything. Anastasia didn't listen. It seemed to her that if she didn't leave today, she would miss something important, and her life would take a completely different path. If she knew, maybe it was better to listen to her mom and turn down the path she had set out on. But for now she knew nothing, and she considered her mom's entreaties an attempt to keep her daughter at home. She doesn't want to let go. It's understandable. The town was called Unity. Near the city were strange cliffs with flat slopes, as if a giant cleaver had been walked over them. These perfectly flat cliffs were white in color. The town was small, but it had a large metallurgical plant. In fact, first there was a steel mill, and the town gradually appeared around it. Anastasia had come here for a reason. Everything was calculated for many years ahead. First medical school and then an institute in New York. There was a place to live. Nayli's friend had been living in Unity for a year, renting an apartment. Anastasia had come to stay with her. Nayli had gone to the city with the same plans as Anastasia to study nursing, but apparently the plans had changed drastically. Nayli was surprisingly good-looking. Her mom wanted her daughter to study music. It seemed to her that the work of a music teacher in kindergarten is the best that a girl can dream of. I play songs to the children. Always warm, clean, not like on the farm. Nayli did not want to study. She skipped classes, but she almost finished music school. Now that incomplete education came in handy. She worked as a singer in the coolest, if truth be told, the only restaurant in town. She made more money than any nurse could ever dream of. She used the money to rent an apartment and lived quite well. Nayli was surrounded by suitors of all colors, young and not so young, single and married. An intelligent doctor of the local hospital, middle-class officials and outright gangsters. She gave no advances to anyone and learned to blow them off, especially the persistent ones. Directly, but not offensively. So far, there had been no conflicts, but Nayli realized it was only for a while. She dreamed of a prince on a white horse. In the current realities, an oligarch with his own airplane, with a bag of money, who would take her to New York, shoot a music video and make her a star. It would be good if he was not old, bald, fat wallet with ears, but young and handsome. Basically someone to love. When Anastasia arrived, Nelly had such a prince on the horizon. A delegation of investors came to the steel mill. Among them was the owner of several engineering plants in Texas. He was relatively young, about 45 years old. Athletic figure, light gray hair. Lived in New York, called Nelly with him, promised a music video, a career, a secure life. Of course, she believed him. There was one major drawback: he was married, but Nelly was sure it wouldn't last long. They'd come to New York, live together. He'd get a divorce, leave his wife so much that she wouldn't object. Anastasia didn't like her friend's decision. Nelly, think again. Look at him, so well-fed. Stately hands, hard eyes. Do you think he'd change his life for you? Why would he? He's got an established life. He knows what he wants. Does he need you now? Well, obviously he's bored. He wants new experiences. And then he won't be able to live without me, said Nelly. Every man needs a young, beautiful, talented wife. A normal man needs a wife he loves. He's been with his wife for at least 20 years. That means he loves her. Sleeping with you doesn't mean he wants to leave her. Maybe he doesn't. You think there were no other women before you and he's still with his wife? Doesn't it bother him? Nelly grinned. Don't you want to change your mind again? You're like Sigmund Freud in a skirt. You're psychoanalyzing me. Don't psychoanalyze me. I can't stay here. I know it's my own fault. I wanted money, didn't study, went into the restaurant business. And now, if the bandits don't kill me, I'll sing for another 5 years. Then what? And here's a chance. That's the kind of man I need. I love him and I'll do anything to make us together. Don't worry about me, girlfriend, I won't be lost, said Nelly. You'll be giving interviews like a star's girlfriend. Oh, Nelly, how can you go into the deep end like that? Anastasia objected. I can do a lot more than that. You see, I've paid a year's rent here. Study and wait for news. She left and disappeared. No call, no letter. Anastasia called Nelly's mother, but she didn't know anything about her daughter. After college, Anastasia tried to go to college. It didn't work out. Okay, next year, she decided. In the meantime, she returned to Springbrook. The hospital's chief of staff was happy to hire her to work in the surgery department. Anastasia loved her job. She had never felt so needed, so important. She also liked the attention of the young surgeon, Denial, who was far from professional. They spent a lot of time together. He asked Anastasia out on dates, walked her home after work. But Anastasia felt he was a little too proper. He had everything figured out, everything in order. A man of reason, but not of feeling. I suppose that helped in a surgeon's job, but girls want something a little different. So when Denial met her at the door with flowers and said, Anastasia, we know each other well, we work together, I love you. I think it's time we got married. Anastasia did not find what to answer, sincerely asked. Marry? Why? Now? Denial was dumbfounded. Why? Don't you understand? You and I are a good couple. We're good friends. It's too early to say couple. I'm sorry, but thanks for the flowers. I'll see you at work. In New York, the son of steel mill owner Andrew was having fun. He organized a contemporary art exhibition in an old abandoned factory. Today was the opening. Strange constructions made of plastic tubes, iron rods, cast iron pipes were called installations. To hang pictures on the walls, you had to have animal intuition. Only the author knows where the top and the bottom are. However, no one in this crowd cared about art. They had been drinking, judging by their condition, for a long time. And some of them, apparently, not only drank. Music was blaring. Multicolored laser beams pierced the space, and painted girls were knocked down. It had been going on for about 5 hours when Andrew's father, Dan Belton, and his guards came in. After getting drunk, MS, something went dancing around the tables. Andrew doused her with champagne and from his 2 girlfriends on him. Dan stared at the whole scene for a couple minutes. Then he commanded security. Get this one in the car. As they dragged Andrew to the car, he yelled, "Dad, are you interested in art too? Aren't you the investment tracker?" In the morning, everyone tiptoed around the Bilton house. Dan was angry. "I gave you money to buy the plant. You bought the plant, and you're setting it up like this. Just because you gave me money doesn't mean I have to fulfill your conditions. You can't demand obedience from a man for money. You can't demand obedience from a man, but with a son who lives his life with painted girls, can you? Listen to me carefully. You're a member of the board of directors of our holding company. If you don't start working, I'll kick you out, you'll be out of money. And all your ugly antics will go away by themselves. I'm giving you one last chance. I'm flying to Pittsburgh tonight. They'll meet you there and take you to Springbrook. There's a problem at the mill. Can you decide if you want to stay on the board? No. You're no longer part owner or heir. What you do for a living is none of my business." Andrew didn't care about the metallurgical plant and its problems, as well as about modern art. But he didn't dare to disobey his father. He didn't believe that his father would disinherit him and kick him out of the house. But he could limit the money, and Andrew did not want to be limited. Accustomed to the fact that nothing to himself, his favorite, do not refuse. There were indeed problems at the plant. He could not work at full capacity because of too old, worn-out equipment. Some of the equipment had to be replaced urgently. This required a lot of money. Andrew had to conduct a technical expertise, calculate the costs, and justify the necessity of these expenses to the board of directors. He spent all his days at the plant, studying the situation, making notes, taking photographs, making calculations, writing reports. Andrew had already figured out what kind of modernization needed to be done. Now he had to convince the board of directors. He suddenly liked to do a necessary and important thing, on which depended the fate of not only the plant but the entire city. Besides, he couldn't forget the dismissive tone with which Dan's father had spoken to him. He made no secret of the fact that he considered his son worthless. Andrew was assigned to Master Benjamin, whom everyone called simply Bilton. It seemed to be to help to drive around the factory, to show, to advise. In fact, Bilton had another task: to look after the young master. "You know things are falling apart around here," he said. "It's just a matter of time before something collapses. And he's climbing all over the place. I don't want anything to happen." And it did happen. A crane jammed in the spill shop, and a ladle with molten metal hovered at a height of 6 meters. In the shop, besides the workers, were Andrew and Alex Bilton. When they heard the horrible scraping of tearing metal and saw the ladle swaying, the workers rushed to the exit. If the bucket slid off its rails and collapsed to the floor, the tons of hot metal would leave no chance for anyone to survive. Bilton rushed for the exit. He looked back to assess what was happening. He saw Andrew frozen in the middle of the shop. He was paralyzed. He looked up in horror at the tilting bucket and didn't move. Bilton screamed. At that moment, he could not remember a single censorious word and ran back into the shop to his frozen colleague, picked him up in an armful and dragged him toward the exit. Andrew came to his senses. They ran to the open doors of the shop and were about to run out. But then, with a terrible rumble, something collapsed. Metal debris fell, sparks. The whole place was covered with vapor. Bilton pushed Andrew in the back with both hands. He flew out of the shop. Bilton was not in time. A metal beam collapsed on him. The foreman was unconscious but alive. The beam had crushed the left side of his body. Everyone struggled together to lift the beam. When the ambulance arrived, Bilton had already been carried out of the shop. Andrew arrived at the hospital and learned that Bilton's leg and arm were badly injured, with broken bones in his leg. It was not life-threatening, but the shattered arm had been decided to be amputated. Andrew burst into the surgeon's office. Denial. Why amputation? Isn't there anything you can do? We can save his life, but not his arm. I'm not a neurosurgeon. We don't have that kind of specialist. There's a Jake Rivers at the regional hospital. He might be able to save the arm, but it's doubtful. So take him to the regional hospital. It's 150 kilometers away. Bilton can't be transported. He won't make it. We have 2 hours left. If we don't operate in 2 hours, he'll die. Don't interfere. Let him get ready. Amputation is a complicated operation, and I've never done it before. But don't start early. Give me 2 hours." Andrew was already running out of the office. He jumped into a sports car and drove out of town, raced down the highway at top speed. On the highway, the policeman saw the speeding car, pointed his radar, saw the speed figures and rushed to his car, but then changed his mind to catch up with the offender. 45 minutes later, Andrew's car flew into the parking lot of the regional hospital. A man in a doctor's coat was smoking at the entrance. "Whose car is River's car here?" Andrew asked. "How do you think you other doctors can earn money for one of these?" The man irritably threw away his cigarette and went inside. Andrew walked over to River's car and slashed 2 tires with a knife. The alarm sounded. A couple minutes later, a man in a green surgical suit jumped out onto the porch. He ran up to the car, saw the flat tires. "Assholes." "It's not the first time this has happened," he turned to Andrew. "I just got here. We need to call a tire service. I don't have my phone with me. How far is it from here?" "No, a couple blocks." "Let me give you a ride. I'm gonna have to wait here anyway." Jake looked at his watch, thought for a second and got in the car. They pulled out of the parking lot. Andrew pressed the gas pedal and the car sped off. "Where are you going?" "The tire repair shop is down the road." "What are you doing?" "Pull over." Jake grabbed the door handle. "You want to jump out? Look at the speedometer." That's how a man in Jacksonville is going to have his arm amputated in an hour. You're the only one who can help him. You help him, and then you're going to sue me. Are you insane? Did you slash the tires too? I have a scheduled surgery in 3 hours. The patient's ready to go. Can we make it? Couldn't you have explained it properly? What if you didn't agree? I don't have time for explanations and persuasions. Of course I wouldn't have agreed. Can you drive any faster? At the hospital, Bilton's wife, eyes swollen with tears, grabbed Denial's hands, demanded immediate surgery. What are you waiting for? Let him be without an arm, but alive. Denial stalled, realizing the risk of the situation. 15 minutes. We can't wait any longer. It's time. Jake entered the hall and went straight to the operating room. The operation lasted 2 hours. There was complete silence under the operating room door. No talking, no sobbing. They waited tensely. A tired Jake came out, slowly pulled his cap off his head, looked around at the waiting people. He's alive, and his arm was saved. But I can't say now how much of its functionality will return. We have to wait. He found Andrew with his eyes. Where's the car? Let's go. Jake got out and Andrew was intercepted by Bilton's wife. Thank you. I sure don't have anything to thank you for. I didn't save him. He got me out of trouble. The next day, Andrew went to the hospital to find out about the master's condition, if he needed help. In Denial's office, a pretty brunette with dark blue, almost black eyes was filling out cards. Hello. Where's your surgeon? Hello, Andrew. You know me. Since yesterday in the hospital, only talk about you. Everyone's wondering why a Jacksonville resident would rush to the rescue. Bilton went to the region. Seriously, they think you were trying to make up for the mill being in this condition because of you. But you saved Bilton. Without your help, he would have been crippled. Anastasia, can I take you out for coffee? How do you know my name? I've heard it, a beautiful nurse named Anastasia. But I'm sorry, it's just a joke. It's on my name tag. The affair was moving fast. Anastasia didn't expect this from herself. She fell in love. It was strange to her that she was seriously contemplating marriage to Denial. Positive in love, dependable. You don't need anything when you have someone you love. Their family had a home in every town where Andrew Holdings mills were located. How else if they had to visit often? You couldn't stay in hotels, could you? Andrew's cottage in Jacksonville stood outside the city in the village of Sosnowy Bor. It was an upscale community. It was modest by big city standards. By local standards, you can't make an honest day's work. Life in prison. Anastasia moved in with Andrew. A couple months later, he told his parents the good news: I'm getting married. Mom didn't appreciate the joy. Anastasia frightened that her son will marry at the drop of a hat to an unknown person. She decided to come and set him straight. But Nelly suddenly arrived before Mom. When she called, Andrew couldn't believe it. Nelly was found. He rushed to the city to the old apartment, and in half an hour already hugged a thin, pale, and some kind of devastated friend. He wanted to know why she'd disappeared, how she'd been living, why she'd come back. Anastasia hadn't been able to find out anything. Nelly had just entered the apartment, suddenly grabbed her stomach and collapsed unconscious. Anastasia called an ambulance, went with her to the hospital. She asked for surgery. They wouldn't let her in. Not your shift. Then she spent the night in the emergency room with her friend. When it was clear that Nelly was all right, I went home to sleep it off. Here's Nelly's story, which she finally got to tell Anastasia. You know, Anastasia, New York is a fairy tale. As it turns out, sometimes a scary one. No, it really is a fairy tale in the beginning. I even made a music video. Haven't you seen it? I mean, not a lot of people have seen this cheap video on a little known channel. Yeah, shopping, restaurants. He took me around like a doll, bragged to all these rich people, then locked me up. No, you can go anywhere, but there's nowhere to go. No friends, no money, constant humiliation. Where are you going to go? I'll kick you out of your apartment. Where will you go if you don't obey? You're in luck. You live in New York. You don't have to work. I feed you, I clothe you. I wanted to leave. It was so disgusting, but it turned out I was pregnant. He didn't want kids on the side. You can't imagine the humiliation of begging him on my knees, let's keep the baby. Let go and I'll leave. I'll raise it myself. You know what he said? I don't need leverage. You'll be begging me for money your whole life. He wouldn't let me go for a minute. Took me to the doctor himself to get an abortion. He was afraid I'd run away. When I was recovering from the abortion, he came to me, criticized me for being so careless, and immediately demanded intimacy. Anyway, I waited until he was asleep, took his credit card and ran away. Withdrew everything I had on the account, $120,000. I'm supposed to get something out of this bastard, right? Let's just say he paid me for all my unborn children. Nelly, that's not accurate. Don't say that, you know yourself. You'll still have children, Anastasia replied. It was hard for Anastasia to be torn between Nelly and Andrew. Her friend needed help to recover, to find a job. She lay all day long with her face pressed against the wall. I don't need anything. Life is over. We should have introduced her to some young man. Obviously, Nelly didn't want to hear about it, but it had to be done gently, casually. They say you drive a wedge with a wedge. On the other hand, Andrew needed her attention. He wanted to be welcomed home with a delicious dinner, and always in a good mood. Where could he get it if his anxiety about Nelly didn't recede? And the job was hard too, and he couldn't relax. And then her mother arrived to inspect the bride. Somehow Anastasia had forgotten all about her. She should have. The future mother-in-law should always be remembered. Olga Petrovna was a beautiful, well-groomed woman with the look and behavior of a queen. She tried to be friendly when she met her, but Anastasia clearly didn't like her too dismissive a look and a luscious grin in her address. Sweetheart, she called her in no other way, as if she were talking to a maid. In the evening, Anastasia accidentally overheard Olga Petrovna talking to her son. Andrew, have you known this girl for long? Already 6 months, a considerable period of time, and the girl is nothing. So you fell for it, and fell for it, said the mother. I love her, replied Andrew. Funny. All your love, I have always been across the road. Remember how many times I had to smooth things over, apologize. But at least there were girls from decent families. What's this? You had to leave New York to pick up a nurse. Mom, Anastasia's having a baby. Oh, great. That's a burden. Just because she's having a baby, even if it's yours, doesn't make her part of our family. She'll never be, don't you see? She's not just a hick, she's a redneck. Don't be crazy. Why would you marry her? You'll run away sooner or later, and you'll have to deal with the baby story for the rest of your life. I think Dad will be the same opinion. Of course, answered Andrew. I can't get married without Dad's approval. I can't do anything myself. I'm a worthless appendage to Papa's greatness. If you don't like my future wife so much, you don't have to talk to her. Don't, as you put it, bring her into the family. We'll live in Brooklyn. Do you hear yourself? You in Brooklyn. I've told you everything. You do what you want. Mark my words, this is not going to end well. You're always welcome, but please don't bring your nurse. And that's how short and to the point the Queen Mom's visit was. Anastasia really was pregnant. She found out a week ago. Anastasia had not even had time to decide on her attitude to this event. On the one hand, of course, joy from the expectation of serious changes in life. On the other hand, she's worried that things are moving so fast. She loves Andrew, but they are so short together. Not everyone knows about each other. Now he's had a fight with his family and has chosen her. But for all his ostensible independence, he lives in the family house, works at his father's factory, is a co-owner of the holding company, and clearly does not burn with the desire to leave the board of directors and transfer his shares to his father. Andrew at any moment can return to the family, not to her. There is no other way out, and there is no hope that the family's attitude towards her will ever change either. Since with the blessing of the family did not work out, they decided to do without a wedding, just signed. Anastasia's mother Nelly and an engineer from the Combine, with whom Andrew became friends, came to visit. Nelly was very wary of Andrew. Anastasia, aren't you being a little hasty? New Yorkers are either gangsters or scumbags. Often both. Okay, don't listen to me, you know I'm talking about mine. You're gonna be fine. You should be happy for the two of us, she said. Anastasia was happy for the two of them, for the five of them. Happy. And she had it all. Andrew was living in a house she'd never even imagined in her dreams, and she was expecting a baby with the man she loved, the best man in the world. When the doctors from the ultrasound room said that it will be a boy, Andrew and Joy threw a party at home. Without warning, Anastasia fell into the house with a large drunken company. Half of the guests she saw for the first time. Some strange young men with different manners and girls in revealing outfits and provocative laughter. Anastasia, with her already noticeable belly, didn't fit in. She felt awkward and uncomfortable. In the morning, she tried to talk to Andrew, but he was unable to explain anything. Then he apologized for a long time, kissed her hands, swore he would never do it again. I've been here almost a year, very tired. Constant problems at the factory. Sorry, I snapped, said Andrew. I don't even understand how I could bring all these people here. They're not my friends, don't get me wrong. They're just casual acquaintances. I'm so ashamed that I've upset you. My darling, darling, I promised you'd be happy. Believe me, I will be. What was Anastasia supposed to do? Just trust. What's the big deal? Tired, drunk, doesn't remember throwing that party. Nothing bad happened. Everything went on as before. Andrew worked. Anastasia tried to arrange home comfort and prepared for the birth of the child. He was attentive and loving, the perfect husband. Anastasia couldn't believe herself that she was so lucky. A son was born, named Benjamin. Nelly wondered, what kind of name is that? Where did they find it? I don't like it. The next year, Anastasia even remembered with difficulty the endless screaming of the child and the constant desire to sleep. One day, Nelly came in, saw her friend completely exhausted and said, "You won't last that long, Anastasia. You're still a wife to your husband. He'll get over it. Benjamin's asleep. And you go to bed. You need to rest." Anastasia listened and didn't understand. What house, what husband, when her son was finally asleep? Night after night, she walked around the room with the child in her arms, coaxing, singing, rocking. And he cried all the time when he fell asleep. She put him in his crib, sat down on the bed, fell head on the pillow, but did not lift his feet off the floor. Why would she have to get up now anyway? She couldn't sleep. I lay there listening, waiting. There was silence for about 5 minutes. Then he started screaming again, a deafening bass. That's what Anastasia was waiting for. The first scream made her head feel like a switch had been flicked. She jumped up, through a dream that was more like a faint, heard her son's cry, got up, and completely exhausted, took him in her arms and started pacing the room again. It went on like this for 24 hours. "Nelly, when do you go to bed?" Anastasia asked. She couldn't remember. Not just when she was cooking dinner. ask her when she saw her husband. She wouldn't answer. If Anastasia had been told that children were different sleeping at 3 a.m., then eating, walking, and sleeping again, she wouldn't have believed it. Andrew would take off work, but no rest at home. Do something so he doesn't scream all night, he pleaded. Anastasia didn't respond, she just didn't have the energy. Suddenly, by magic, everything changed. Benjamin was a year old, and it was as if he realized that he couldn't behave like that. He started sleeping at night, stopped screaming. Now they slept at night and walked and played during the day. Anastasia came to her senses and suddenly noticed that her husband was rarely at home. He was also traveling back and forth on business. Anastasia, I'm going to New York. You know, the business of the concern. Don't you miss me here? He kissed Anastasia and his son and drove off. What's there to do? Clutch him and yell, "Don't leave." Why shouldn't he work? He has to go, even if he's taking a break from them. He's entitled to go. He took a vacation so that the whole country found out about it. For the fight major, the son of a metallurgical magnate, showed all the TV channels. A disgraceful debauch with girls of easy behavior and muzzling. Ended up in a hospital and a criminal case. Bilton Sr. included all his connections, and his son was weaned from prison on the condition that he goes to Las Vegas and in New York does not stick. Andrew had a faint hope that Anastasia didn't know about the scandal, but there was no hiding the truth. When he returned, Anastasia immediately demanded a divorce. Are you serious? What do you think you're doing? Would it be cheaper for me to grab a piece of your fortune and let you live happily ever after? You won't get a penny. I don't want anything. Just get a divorce and Benjamin and I can go to my mom's and you can go wherever you want. Benjamin stays with me, with you. What do you need him for? Who reminded you that you have a son? Dad. Am I right? That's right, the stupid son. There's no hope for him. Do you need an heir? How can an empire be lost? Andrew came over and slapped Anastasia hard across the face. She could not resist, fell, got up, wiped the blood with the palm of her hand. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow, Anastasia said. Yeah, sell it. But be warned. I'm giving you such conditions you'll have to go to court. You won't get anything. The only condition is that I never see you again. And that's how Anastasia's married life ended. It was painful, hurtful, and completely unclear what to do next. She packed her and Benjamin's things and left for Nayli's. Nayli was drowning Achilles, but her friend was fully supportive. She was right. She couldn't stay with him. It's only going to get worse. I hope you don't go with the beats means love theory. You'll get a divorce. But don't play the nobleman. You're entitled to a share of the estate. Don't walk away proud and with nothing. I'm sick of these princes. Won't they take my son away from me? Anastasia asked. Why should they? It was your Andrew in the heat of screaming to scare you. What does he need a son for? Anastasia filed for divorce. They didn't get a divorce right away, only through the court, because there's a child. Andrew asked to see her. She said no. She wasn't going to negotiate with him, let alone go back. His father is right. Andrew is really unable to be responsible for anyone, even for himself. Family life is not for him. He tried, but it didn't work. He was quickly deflated. A year, tortured by his wife and screaming child, was enough for the illusion of great love and happiness in marriage dissipated. Tried to be a husband and father, failed. That old life proved more appealing. Anastasia, of course, was worried. She felt like her world had fallen apart. She was going to live a long and happy life with Andrew. Despite the terrible offense she still loved, interrupted her soul with memories of recent happiness, forbade herself to remember, but it turned out badly. She wanted to hide from everyone and surrender to sorrow. But all her days were taken up with the child, no time to suffer. Nayli was as supportive as she could be. My darling, you should at least cry. It might make you feel better. But why cry? I've cried and still I feel sick. Are we some kind of defective princes? I told you, but who can learn from other people's experience? But you want your own rake. Come on, what's there to remember now? Said Nayli. Aren't you moving forward into a new life? You don't realize how lucky you are. If you had missed for 5 years, you would have tolerated it, forgiven it. There was only one end anyway, and the kid would have grown up by now. You have to explain things to him somehow. Oh, Anastasia, you've suffered a bit. But don't take too long. Yes, your husband was a jerk, but at least you have a son. What a jerk her husband was, Anastasia found out a couple days later. She was served a summons to the court, where the issue of determining the place of residence of the child will be decided. Andrew demanded that the child live with him. Anastasia was in a panic. She didn't understand why Andrew needed a son, but it wasn't like he was going to become a single father and raise a child. If it was his parents' idea, that was strange too. They hadn't seen a grandson in a year, and now they were in love. Or is it because Benjamin's the heir? We should keep him to ourselves. I don't know what his uneducated mother would think. There was no time to look into the reasons, but to decide what to do. The chance of losing the child was real. Anastasia realized she couldn't win the trial. No home, no job, no money, even if she had everything. Suing the rich and powerful Biltons was futile. Anastasia thrashed around the apartment in terror and despair. Her head wasn't working at all. There was only one thought: I won't give it back. I won't give it back. There was no idea how to do it. When Nellie arrived, Anastasia was banging her head against the wall with her son in her arms. Benjamin must have been roaring for a long time. Nellie couldn't get him out of her friend's arms. She was hysterical. Having calmed the child down, Nellie sent Anastasia to the kitchen with Valerian and gradually found out what had happened. Nellie, won't they take my son away from me? Anastasia asked with desperation. I can't live without him. They'll take him away and I won't see him again. Anastasia's eyes were so frightening to look at. I won't give him back, she repeated. Calm down, said Nellie. Stop being hysterical. If you get that hysterical in court, they'll put you in the hospital. Calm down, said Nellie. Let's think about what to do. We need a good lawyer. Only there are no such lawyers here. We can't afford a Moscow one. No, that's silly. The Biltons will have a better lawyer anyway. Jesus, Nellie, what lawyers? Anastasia exclaimed in despair. I can't win this trial with neither money nor lawyers. We have to hide somewhere so they won't find us. We'll leave. We'll run away. If I don't show up in court, they won't rule in my favor. Whether you show up or not doesn't matter. They'll win. We'll leave. We just have to think about where. We can't go to my mom's. They'll find me. I don't have anyone else. Do you realize that if you run away, they'll be looking for you? Nellie asked. Are you going to hide for the rest of your life? Then you have to go somewhere where they won't find you. There was no logic in Anastasia's words. What logic if your thoughts were scattering like cockroaches and you couldn't put them together? But her intuition was screaming to run. Until morning they sat, going over the options, sometimes very absurd. They couldn't go to Moscow. They couldn't go home either. Abroad, it's even from the realm of fantasy. They tried all their relatives and friends. No, we can't. It's too obvious they'll find it. And then Nellie remembered that her grandmother had a friend, Aunt Carla. Nellie knew her a little, having traveled with her grandmother a few times as a child. Carla lived in some remote village. Nellie remembered it had been a long drive. About 5 years ago, Aunt Carla had died. She was a lonely woman. Why didn't she have a family? Nellie had never wondered. She'd left her house to a friend. She had children and grandchildren, in case she needed it. Her mother once said that the neighbor's daughter lives in the house now. Let her live there. The house is empty. I can't afford to sell it. And why sell it? It's worth a penny. Let it be for a rainy day. That's where we should go, said Nellie. And that rainy day came. The Biltons aren't digging. They're nobody's relatives. I'll call my mom in the morning and find out where to go. Only the village is out of the way. The bus doesn't go there. I remember it took me and my grandmother about an hour to walk down some country road. But we always went in the summer, Nellie said. An hour on the road isn't too bad, is it? What about with Alex in your arms in the cold? They clear the road, of course, and they take groceries to the store. The ambulance comes. I remember my grandmother asking me, how do you live here in winter? And Aunt Carla said it's not always possible to get out. But they don't go to town every day. When the road's cleaned, they go. "Oh, Anastasia, we've got the wrong idea," Nayli exclaimed. "Scared to let you go? I'm afraid to stay here. I'm a country girl. I'm used to wandering in the woods. And the fact that it's in the middle of nowhere, with no roads or communications, is even better. Call your mom. Tell her to give you the address." "Thank you, Nayli. This really is the way out. We'll stay there and see what happens," Anastasia said. Anastasia's mind cleared, her panic receding. She began to pack for the trip, folding her clothes, taking the warmest ones. She couldn't carry much. She withdrew the rest of her salary and allowance from her card. When would she ever see an ATM again? Nayli got the address. The village of Barikrik. What a nice, bright, optimistic name. Anastasia was so afraid for her son that she was ready to go right away. Nayli talked her out of it. "Calm down. We'll call and see when the bus is," she said. "You're in a hurry today. You can go tomorrow. Nayli, don't tell me where it is. You're the only one who needs to know." "Don't worry, friend, we'll get through this," said Nayli, even though she was feeling a little wary. She knew that running away was not an option. The police would be looking for her, not only the Biltons, but also the Biltons. But Anastasia saw no other way to stay with her son. It's scary, but without a son, life would be over. So she must flee. Doubt is a useful thing, but not now. It's done. "Let's go," Anastasia said. The bus left Stoneville Station at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. It was just over 200 kilometers to the village, so she would be at the road that led to the village around 5. It gets dark early in the winter, but it's still light at 5 p.m. If it's still an hour to the village, we should get there by daylight. That's good. I wouldn't want to wander through the woods in the dark. "They say there are wolves here," Nayli said in a shaky voice. Anastasia had Alex in her arms and her bag on her shoulder. She got on the bus. It was old, rattling, forced, and most unpleasantly, poorly heated. After an hour on the bus, Anastasia realized she was freezing. Her feet were especially cold. The metal floor of the bus was about the same temperature as outside the window, about 25°C. She tried to lift her legs, but she couldn't stand it for long and put them down. Pulled her jacket out of her bag and covered Alex. A blizzard had started. There was a shroud of snow in front of the bus, swirling back and forth. Anastasia didn't understand how the driver could see the road, but they kept driving. She raised and lowered her frozen feet, wiggled her toes in her boots. Time passed, and more hours later, when she was stiff, the bus stopped. "Who wants to go to Berry Creek?" The driver asked. "You see the clearing between the trees, that's where you go. Why isn't anyone meeting you? Good luck, then." "We're fine," Anastasia said. "Thank you." The bus left. Anastasia wrapped her scarf tighter, put her bag back on, and walked on. The road must not have been cleaned today or yesterday. There was a lot of snow, and it was hard to walk. The blizzard was hitting her face, making her eyes water and coating her eyelashes with ice. Alex was asleep. Anastasia prayed he wouldn't wake up for much longer. If he woke up and cried, he'd swallow the frosty air and might get sick. She tried to walk faster. It would start to get dark soon. Anastasia walked slower and slower with fatigue. It seemed to her that she had been walking for quite some time. The village was around here somewhere. There was nothing to see because of the snowstorm. It was getting dark. The snow was getting heavier and heavier. Shielding Alex from the snow, she walked on and on. It seemed to her that she was lost, but it was impossible to stop, and the village kept disappearing. Suddenly there was a howl or a bark. A shadow flashed between the trees. Wolves. Anastasia threw her bag off her shoulder and tried to run. The snow was deep and sticky. She fell, covering her son. The wolf didn't pounce for some reason. He sat down next to her. Anastasia raised her head. "They say there are wolves here," Nayli said in a shaky voice. Anastasia had Alex in her arms and her bag on her shoulder. She got on the bus. It was old, rattling, forced, and most unpleasantly poorly heated. After an hour on the bus, Anastasia realized she was freezing. Her feet were especially cold. The metal floor of the bus was about the same temperature as outside the window, about 25°C. She tried to lift her legs, but she couldn't stand it for long and put them down. pulled her jacket out of her bag and covered Alex. A blizzard had started. There was a shroud of snow in front of the bus, swirling back and forth. Anastasia didn't understand how the driver could see the road, but they kept driving. She raised and lowered her frozen feet, wiggled her toes in her boots. Time passed, and more hours later, when she was stiff, the bus stopped. "Who wants to go to Berry Creek?" The driver asked. "You see the clearing between the trees, that's where you go. Why isn't anyone meeting you?" "Good luck, then." "We're fine," Anastasia said. "Thank you." The bus left. Anastasia wrapped her scarf tighter, put her bag back on, and walked on. The road must not have been cleaned today or yesterday. There was a lot of snow, and it was hard to walk. The blizzard was hitting her face, making her eyes water and coating her eyelashes with ice. Alex was asleep. Anastasia prayed he wouldn't wake up for much longer. If he woke up and cried, he'd swallow the frosty air and might get sick. She tried to walk faster. It would start to get dark soon. Anastasia walked slower and slower with fatigue. It seemed to her that she had been walking for quite some time. The village was around here somewhere. There was nothing to see because of the snowstorm. It was getting dark. The snow was getting heavier and heavier. Shielding Alex from the snow, she walked on and on. It seemed to her that she was lost. But it was impossible to stop, and the village kept disappearing. Suddenly there was a howl or a bark. A shadow flashed between the trees. Wolves. Anastasia threw her bag off her shoulder and tried to run. The snow was deep and sticky. She fell, covering her son. The wolf didn't pounce for some reason. He sat down next to her. Anastasia lifted her head. It wasn't the wolf's shadow, but a large white dog. It stood up, barked, waved its muzzle somewhere forward, and ran away. It was useless to look for the bag in this blizzard, so Anastasia followed the dog. A light flickered ahead. She walked toward it, barely moving her numb legs and holding Alex tightly against her so she wouldn't drop him. The light burned, and she walked toward it. Gradually, it took on the outline of a window, and around it the outline of a house began to show through the blizzard. My God, there are people there, she thought with relief. Anastasia staggered up onto the porch and tried to knock on the door with her hand. Without realizing if it succeeded, she became completely exhausted and slowly slid down the wall. She must have knocked because a man's silhouette appeared in the window. He put his hand to the glass, trying to see who was knocking. Seeing no one, he went to the door. When he opened it, he found a woman lying there, cradling a baby. That she was alive was clear. She had just knocked. Apparently, she had just passed out from the cold. The man picked her up along with the boy in his arms and carried her into the house. Anastasia woke up. It was so nice and peaceful. Suddenly, memories of the snow, the woods, the dog whirled through her mind. Alex. Alice, my son, she opened her eyes in alarm. There were wooden walls all around. She was lying on the bed, covered with a warm blanket. "Well, sweetie, you're awake," said the woman sitting at the table, about 60 years old, with a kind face and a soft look. "That's good. And my son is asleep. He has already eaten, taken a walk. Now he sleeps. Don't get up yet. I'll bring you some herbal tea. Don't worry, no one will hurt you here." "Where am I? Is that Berry Creek?" Anastasia asked, looking around. "Not quite," the woman replied. "Let's have some tea first, and then I'll tell you all about it." Anastasia drank the tea and looked around. The house was nice and warm. There was a staircase to the second floor on the side. Everything looked very cozy: fabrics, carpets, sturdy old furniture. A harem, not a house, she thought. Strange. Where in the woods would such a little house come from? "So you were going to Berry Creek?" the woman asked. "Who are you going to?" "I am from Berry Creek myself, but I have not seen you before," Anastasia answered. "Did you know Aunt Nina?" "The owners of her house let me stay there." "Yes, it's a nice house. You can live there," agreed Anastasia Smith. "But something must have happened to you. If you haven't gotten to people yet. Misha found you alive on the porch yesterday. A man doesn't go out in the cold to look for a village he's never been to, and with a baby in his arms. And the village isn't far, only you've gone off the road. It's good that you found us. You're in the gamekeeper's house, though here he is a gamekeeper, a forester and a hunter, she continued. He has a house in Pesky, but he is rarely there, so he lives here. Call me Anastasia Smith. What's your name? I'm Anastasia, replied the guest. Well, Anastasia, you rest now, and I'll go and cook dinner, said Anastasia Smith and looked out of the window. Oh, here comes Misha. The front door slammed. Someone shook the snow off their clothes and boots. There was the sound of outerwear being removed. Anna's heart raced. The owner of the house would be coming in now. Maybe he didn't want uninvited guests. Who would want a woman and child slumped on the porch in a semi-fainting state? Anastasia was worried, as if her fate depended on how the stranger treated her. She had not come to live with him. She would take Alex and go to the village. But this house seemed so cozy, and Anastasia Smith had treated them so warmly. She didn't want it to end right now. A tall, stout man entered the room. He smelled of frosty air. He walked to the stove, leaned his back against it, and turned to Anastasia Mikhailovna. How is it? Have the lost guests come to their senses? Then he looked back at Anna. His eyes were merry and kind. With a smile, he asked, How did you scare yesterday? I didn't expect guests. By the way, I found your bag in the woods. He went out the door and came back with Anna's bag. Is it yours? Yes, it's mine. I lost it when I was running from the wolf, she exclaimed with relief. The dog seemed so big and white. That's our Tuzik, laughed the man. Anastasia laughed heartily with him. That's not how you associate a nickname with a huge dog. Well, he's Tuzik. A big and smart dog. They were making mincemeat. Alex was crawling on the floor, humming something, rattling toys. Anya, you call me Aunt Rose, said Rosalie. Or while you say Anastasia Smith, you'll break your tongue. Only Matthew calls me by my first name and middle name. Why is that? Anastasia asked. Is he your son or grandson? Neither. He's my student. I've worked at the school for almost 40 years. All the villagers are my students. 3 years ago, I was all alone. In an instant, no one was left. My daughter, son-in-law, and grandson died in a car accident. My life was over, too. I didn't know how to go on living. I didn't leave the house. I didn't let anyone in. Matthew sat outside my house all night long, consoling me, telling me to eat, forcing me to eat. When I came to my senses, he brought me here. He said he couldn't do it alone. That's how I live. I go to the village for a couple of weeks. Then I come back here again. I can't do without this house, and I can't do without Matthew. So decide who he is to me. Wiping away her tears, Anastasia hugged Rosalie. Her heart clenched with pity for the woman, for Matthew, for herself. Rosalie cried too, and hugged Anastasia. She had suddenly told her story, deciding that these people had a right to know how she had come to be with them. They wouldn't hurt or offend. Matthew came home to find Rosalie and Anastasia hugging each other and wiping away tears. Alex was moving from one to the other, and he had a face that made it look like he was going to cry, too. There were unfinished dumplings on the table. What's wrong? Matthew asked, picking Alex up and walking over to the women. 2 pairs of crying eyes looked at him. Then the women sighed, wiped away their tears, and continued making dumplings. Matthew demanded an explanation. After dinner, they had a big council. Anastasia told them everything again. They began to think of ways to help her. Anya, do you know how the trial ended? Rosalie asked. I don't know, but I'm guessing, said Anastasia. No, you have to know for sure, Rosalie insisted. We'd better look at the papers. They must have been sent to you, said Rosalie. There's nothing we can do now. Give me Nayli's address and phone number. I'll go into town tomorrow and find out. Don't worry. I'll make sure that no one knows that anyone is interested in your case. I'll also find out if anyone's looking for you. All right, girls, it's too early to worry. Let's sleep. And we'll worry tomorrow, Matthew added. Matthew left in the morning. Anastasia hoped that the news wouldn't be too bad. She didn't really believe Matthew would be able to find out anything, though. Rosalie watched her floundering, then suddenly said, Don't you doubt it, Matthew will find out. He's a forester, of course, but he wasn't always one. He has an excellent law degree. He went to school in New York, then opened a law firm with a friend. He's a good lawyer, as they say nowadays, a lawyer with a name. True, he married very badly. His wife ruined his life so badly that he left the office to his friend and came here to lick his wounds. But he's appreciated. He's got people coming here asking for help. So he still has connections. He'll figure it out, you bet he will. Anastasia's head was a mess. How could this be? Running away from home, nearly freezing in the woods, and ending up at the home of a famous lawyer. It didn't work that way. She got dressed and walked out of the house. Gotta breathe, look at the trees and the sky, come to her senses. If it's true, there's hope. Anya, come and have a look. Rosalie called out. Anastasia ran into the house. Alex was standing in the middle of the room, waving his arms, staggering, but standing. He took a step, fell to all fours. Oh my God, he's gone, Anastasia exclaimed. It was such boundless happiness that all the troubles somehow faded and fell away. It was as if Anastasia had grown wings, an unjustified but unshakable confidence. No one could ever take her child away from her. She'd bite everyone. She wouldn't give up her son. We were waiting for Matthew. Our lives depended on his news. It wasn't just words, they were. And if Alex, because of his young age, or rather 1 year of living, didn't get into the situation, Anastasia waited for Matthew with bated breath. Matthew arrived late in the afternoon, came in, took off his jacket, walked to the table, sat down. Rosalie, Anastasia hovered around him. They didn't have the courage to ask. Were you expecting me? Matthew intrigued when he realized he couldn't go any further. I'm going to get beaten up. He spoke. Exhale. It's not that bad. The trial went ahead. Andrew had a lawyer brought in from New York, but for some reason the local judge wasn't too scared. Maybe he didn't take the New Yorkers' pressure seriously. Or maybe he thought that in front of them will not give up. Anyway, the court ruled that the child must live with his father. But the execution is on hold pending questioning of the mother, which is you, Anastasia. You have 1 month to appear in court. In a month, if you don't appear in court, the judgment will take effect. You'll be wanted, and then they'll file for termination of parental rights. What good is that? Anastasia asked. You have a month. In a month, you have to prove that you can raise a child. You have to have a job, a place to live, money for child support. Ideally, a full family. That's great. You've got it all, Anastasia said wryly. No, I have a job. I'm on maternity leave. I work at the hospital, but no place to live, no money, no husband. Listen, your Nayli is a tough cookie. Andrew's nose is digging up the ground. They're looking for you. They visit her every other day, hoping you'll show up. And she's like, I don't know anything. Leave me alone. She wouldn't talk to me, but I convinced her. I'm charming and honest, Matthew chuckled. She's a beauty too, Anastasia. Rosalie's a supermodel out there. Rosalie hummed. Which is better than me. But of course not as good, but beautiful. Almost like Anastasia. Wow. Is that a compliment? It's kind of out of time, but it's nice. Anastasia smiled. As expected, the Andrews won the trial. They got the baby back, but somehow there's no despair. Somehow it feels like everything can be changed. Because Matthew believes in it. Well, if he believes it, she'll believe it too. Anastasia realized she couldn't do anything on her own. All she could do was trust Matthew. Anastasia couldn't sleep at night. The thought of marrying Daniel came to mind. She wondered if she could ask Daniel for help. Didn't he love her? Ask her to marry him? Of course, he'd had his own life for a long time. But a sham marriage could be arranged. She'd have a place to live and a husband to sue for her son. And then they'd divorce. Wouldn't he want to help? We should tell Matthew in the morning. Sounds like a good option. Anastasia. Are you out of your mind? Matthew questioned. What if your Daniel is married? Even if he isn't, he has a girl he loves. Of course he's a noble man. He won't refuse you, but he won't ruin a man's life. I'm sure if he's single, he'll help a friend in distress. And if he still loves you, are you ready to marry him for real? If not, forget it. Anastasia sighed. But I don't have any other ideas. You know, if there's no other way out, I'll marry you myself. Not for real, of course. I'm not married. I don't have a mistress. No one will get hurt. Let's leave that option for last resort. Forget about Daniel. The next day, Matthew had a visitor, a young, beautiful girl. She came on foot, apparently from the village. "Matthew, you haven't been here for a long time. I've been waiting and waiting, so I thought I'd see if anything was wrong," Rosalie cooed. "Oh, there is. Matthew's getting married." He laughed. "Here's the bride, Anastasia. Come here." Anastasia came down from the second floor with the baby in her arms. "That's how the young and foolish love each other," Rosalie sighed. "What happened there? I do not tell me on stupidity and split up. She didn't even tell me about the baby. Matthew brought them here as soon as he found out. He's a bit of a mess now. Think about it. The woman you love is back. And he's got a son." They were both speechless when one left, the other outraged. "Rose, why are you lying? Imagine there's no normal men in the village. There's only my Matthew, and he lives in Biryakovo. All the unmarried women are making plans for him. He's had a hard time fighting them off. I barely got out. I wasn't lazy to drag him through the woods. And he doesn't want it. He doesn't like anyone." Anastasia said thoughtfully. "Only you, Matthew. I can see he's got a twinkle in his eye. Don't you like him at all?" Carla continued. "A fake marriage to avoid losing the baby is certainly a solution. But I'm afraid it's going to kill him. It's not what he's hoping for." Oh, how Anastasia's heart ached. She liked Matthew, liked him too much. But you can't go from fire and brimstone to fire and brimstone. She'd been married once before. And this is just a few weeks' acquaintance. No one's ever proposed and asked me to marry her so quietly. You're dreaming. It's an empty fantasy, nothing more. Another week passed, and now the guest didn't show up. So who wasn't expected, he just showed up. There was a knock at the door. Rosalie opened it. On the threshold stood a young man dressed in a dapper, metropolitan appearance. Rosalie knew at once who it was. She tried to slam the door shut, but he pushed it open and stepped inside. "Anastasia, I know you're here. Come out, we need to talk." "Andrew, how did you find me?" "I gotta hand it to you, you hid pretty well. We barely figured out that your Nelly, or rather her mom, has a house in Biryakovo, but no one saw you there. We found a kind woman who told us that a young woman with a child, like the gamekeeper's wife, lives in the gamekeeper's house. Here I've come to see if we have one wife for two." He threw the papers in front of Anastasia. "You can't hide anymore. Here's a subpoena. If you don't show up, you'll lose the baby, even though there's already a judgment. They just want to observe all the formalities and see the mother in court. I suggest you don't go to court and sign all the papers. I've got it right here." Anastasia exclaimed indignantly. "Do you seriously think I will give up my son voluntarily?" "Then you don't give him up voluntarily. You don't have a chance. And don't you dare run away again. I'll find you. I'll see you in court." What a scoundrel. Rosalie, who had been silent all this time, couldn't stand it. He needs a child, and he didn't even ask how he was, if he was sick. Carla looked sympathetically at Anastasia. Suddenly needing something? He's so bored he didn't even ask to see it. Anastasia, you can imagine he didn't even want to see it. She's fighting for him in court. "Give me the baby. How did you manage to marry someone like that?" "I don't know," Anastasia said sadly. "Aunt Rose was stupid. She wouldn't listen to her mom." They talked as if Andrew wasn't here about him, but without him. Andrew looked at them perplexed. Have they gone completely crazy? And went out, loudly slamming the door. "That's it now. Now only the trial, in which everything is already decided," said Anastasia. Back in the evening, Matthew experienced déjà vu. Sitting again, crying again. "Okay, girls, I'm sick of you. Why are you crying so much? I told you, everything will be fine. Just because your half-baked tycoon showed up today, it doesn't mean anything. Don't look so surprised. I know he came. I even know what he came with, a subpoena. Give me 2 more days, then I can go to court. If anything else comes up, I'll let you know. He turned to Anastasia. Yeah, you get ready to get married just in case. Just like that. Clearly the marriage wouldn't be real. But Anastasia was worried, like she was actually getting married. She'd been watching Matthew, and she liked him more and more. Missing him when he was gone for long periods of time. Glad when he came. He wants to help. He's even willing to marry. But if he didn't have to save her, would he marry her, she pondered. Yes, very timely thoughts. There's a trial coming up. There's a good chance her son will be taken away, and she's dreaming. Sometimes Anastasia fell into despair. I can't win this trial no matter what Matthew says then. Seeing Matthew driving into town, bringing some papers, she began to believe that all was not lost. Matthew's a lawyer, knows what he's doing. A couple days later, Matthew brought some papers, spread them out on the table, sat Anastasia across from him, and began to explain. Now you're going to write an application for a residence permit. Tomorrow I'll go to the village, to the administration office, and register you with me. This is how I edited your text. In this way, we will solve the issue of housing. And what custody? You can't dig it up. The conditions for the child are in place, Matthew said. There are 2 problems: child support money and a single-parent family. The Wonsons will argue that there are grandparents in addition to the father. They're better able to provide childcare and decent support. You have a problem: either you take care of the child and then you have no income, or you go to work, but then you cannot provide care. Even if you work, your income does not compare to the Wonsons' income. That means you need a husband to provide an income so you can take care of the baby. Matthew smiled. By the way, I can apply for marriage registration tomorrow at the administration office. What, right tomorrow? Anastasia wondered. No, you think about it, but don't take too long. Time is running out. I don't understand you. You were going to ask Artem to marry you. I'm asking you to marry him. Especially since you say it's not a real marriage. Or is there something that makes you uncomfortable? Of course I'm confused. You're a lawyer. You know the risks. Signing a woman and child into a house you don't know, marrying her. Isn't that a risk? I'm a pretty good judge of character. It's a professional skill. And I'd also like to help a woman I like, Matthew answered, looking her in the eye. So you're about to sign a contract of service with me. You understand me as a lawyer. I will represent your interests in court. You just have to trust me. Well, that's all for now, he said. The anxious days of waiting for the trial dragged on. Matthew checked in on Anastasia and Sevelius. He brought in the guardianship officers from the city. 2 very serious ladies went around the house, looking in every corner, even the refrigerator and pots and pans. They looked at each other sternly, wrote something down, took pictures. Smiling strangely, they tried to play with Savli. For a long time they asked Anastasia what she played, what she ate, how much the child walked, what he was sick with. Then they signed a statement of living conditions. Matthew explained why it was necessary. Now the Wonsons will not be able to claim that the child has bad conditions and that you are not engaged in the development and upbringing of your son. Here is my edited version of the text. The trial was 3 days away. To keep her mind off her gloomy thoughts, Anastasia started cleaning. As she scrubbed the floors, dusted and hung out the rugs, she seemed to calm down a little. Rosalie, worried that she couldn't do anything to help, decided to at least indulge. She put the dough for the pies. After dressing Sevelius, she went out on the porch with him. The weather was fabulous. The frost was not strong, the sun was shining, everything around was so bright and festive. Nothing terrible would ever happen again. Anastasia had had her share of misfortune. She hadn't done anything wrong. Why should she be endlessly punished? Anastasia walked with Sevelius, played snowballs with him, went sledding. It had been a long time since she'd been in such a cloudless mood. Suddenly it was as if something prickled. It became cold and anxious. Something must happen, something very unpleasant. I didn't feel like going out. I wanted to go home and close myself in the fortress. The house was clean, bright, and smelled of cakes. No, nothing will happen. It was just a dream, Anastasia reassured herself. Rose, someone's coming, Rosalie said excitedly. It was as if Anastasia's anxiety had gotten to her. Who the hell is coming? Didn't Matthew say someone was coming? Anastasia went to the window. A large black car was turning down the driveway toward the house. So much for trouble. Her intuition didn't fail. There was a knock at the door. Anastasia took Sevelius in her arms. Rosalie went to open it. Two men stood on the doorstep. "Hello, I'm looking for Anastasia," one of them said. "Anastasia Smith?" "Come in," Rosalie replied. One of the men went inside, the other stayed on the porch. "You must be Anastasia." "And this is Sevelius. I'm Dan Vonson, Andrew's father. I'm here to get you to sign the relinquishment papers. The trial's in 3 days, and I don't want our family to be bombarded with reporters accusing us of all sins. It's all going to come down to the same thing. Let's save time and nerves. If you need money, give me a sum. You shouldn't have come. I won't sign anything. There'll be a trial." "So it'll be a trial. Are you going to give me conditions? What are you hoping for? And in your position, refusing to settle things amicably. You have no job and no money at home. Do you think you'll get to keep the baby? What I have and what I don't have, my lawyer can explain to you. I'm not talking to you." "Lawyer? Where'd you get a lawyer?" "Well, no lawyer's going to help you anyway. You're grasping at straws, girl." "Give them his info, my lawyer will contact him. If you're going to sue, they have something to talk about." "Matthew Anderson, please." "Service agreement? Who's Matthew Anderson? The one from LA? Don't bullshit me, you don't have the money for an average lawyer. And Anderson doesn't do charity work. And paternity cases are out of his league." Dan Vonson scrutinized the contract details. "This can't be right. What kind of tricks are these? Are you trying to trick me? Contact Matthew Anderson and ask him all your questions yourself. You'd better get going. It's a long drive back to town." "Oh, I found out what you're up to." "Then you're in trouble. You're not going to win a trial by smashing me up against the wall." Vonson irritably tossed the contract and walked out. Anastasia was shaking. Apparently the Wonsons really don't want a scandal, since Wonson SR had shown up to talk her into it. It's a scandal, and Andrew's back at the center. Journalists love Andrew. They'll tell you how the son of a steel magnate is stealing his ex-wife's baby. It's not the Wonsons who are afraid of a trial. They are sure that no court will go against their money and connections. They're afraid of being on the front page of the tabloids again. They're afraid for their reputations. Respectable and seemingly prosperous family Wonson, most of all afraid to fall in the mud, to lose the image of infallibility, hence the threats. How afraid Anastasia was. It seemed to her that everything was for nothing, that even Matthew could do nothing. She cradled her son in her arms, like it was the last time. "Should we leave?" Rose asked. "What do you think? Do you think they'll find us again?" "No, we have to go all the way now. Otherwise it'll never end." "What are you talking about? What do you mean you're leaving and leaving us behind?" Matthew asked. "My girl, we're together now, and I won't let you hurt Sevelius. You'll see." Matthew, when he heard what had happened, said, "Don't panic. I've got everything ready for trial. I don't care what Vonson said. We're going to win the trial, I promise you. You believe me?" "I do." Anastasia nodded. "We'll go tomorrow and sign the papers. It'll be our last argument. Vonson won't have any reason to take the baby away from you." Anastasia calmed down, wiped her tears, and they went to drink tea and cakes. "And give Sevelius here. We'll go to bed with him," Anastasia called out. Rosalie hid her tears of joy. How good it was. Matthew was finally getting married. She was so attached to Sevelius that she could not imagine a better family for her beloved Matthew. She couldn't believe it wasn't a real marriage. Not until they admitted it to themselves. She had realized long ago that it was true love. Tomorrow they'd get married, and then we'd see how much strength they had to hide their feelings from each other. "Come on, brides, let's have tea, and then go to bed. Put everything out of your minds. Don't get discouraged before your time. You need to rest so you look good tomorrow. You're getting married, after all. Rosalie came over and hugged Anastasia. I'm so happy for you. The next day, Anastasia and Matthew got married without guests, witnesses, or rings. Only Rosalie and Sevelius were waiting for them at home. Anastasia's mind was in turmoil, uncertain, unspoken. Had she really gotten married? What to do about it now? Here sits next to her husband, or still not a husband. And if he said after the trial, that's it, wife, divorce. Anastasia realized that she does not want to divorce him and wants a real marriage, only with him alone. But you can't say that. Yeah, the situation. There's no telling what Matthew's thinking. He's sitting there with a completely unperturbed face. No emotion, just a smile or a sneer in his eyes. Married and married, it's no big deal. We're used to it. Only Aunt Rose sputtered with emotion, happy, hugging, kissing. Of the three of them, she was the most like a happy newlywed. Here it was, court day had arrived. Anastasia was so nervous that she gave the impression of being insane. Hands shaking, eyes huge with terror. She didn't even seem to blink. She didn't say a word all the way to town. Matthew looked at her with a wary eye to see if she'd fainted. He himself was professionally calm and collected. He couldn't calm Anastasia. But he tried to explain how to behave in court. But he didn't know if he got it. So he decided to use shock therapy. All right, my little star. Are you reacting in any way? You married a normal woman, and now you're either dumb or crazy. Family life has brought you down quickly. Are you going to go to court with your divorcee right now? Anastasia smiled, so she could hear well. Now seriously, don't be stupid. Here's an express option, just what you need. When asked by the judge, say your first and last name. If the judge addresses you, say, yes, Your Honor, I'll do the talking for you. Daddy's girl, calm down. You need to look confident. Remember, your ex-husband and his father are in the audience. It's a sacred thing to mess with them, and we're going to do it tonight. Okay, here we go. Look at me. I swear to you, we're going to win. All right, one last shot. He leaned over to Anastasia and kissed her. Okay, I think I'm back to normal now, but it's over. I'm all you're going to think about now. Outside the courthouse, Nellie was praying. When she saw her friend, she threw her arms around her and kissed her. Nellie's presence finally brought Anastasia to her senses. Not to say she'd calmed down, but when someone was supportive, confidence was added. Matthew turned on, stopped joking. His gaze became hard. He took Anastasia's hand and led her into the hall. Vonson's lawyer deflated when Bilton entered the room. Apparently, Vonson didn't even fully believe it was true. Who would have believed it? They were hoping for a quick victory over a homeless, uninterested nurse. This Bilton guy. During the hearing, it was revealed that the defendant has a job, a house and child support money from her husband. And the husband is none other than Mr. Bilton himself. It was a low blow. Vonson's attorney still tried to turn the situation around, but it was all in vain. There was no reason to take the child away from the mother. That's what the court ruled. On her way out of the courtroom, Anastasia was intercepted by Andrew. You bitch. Bilton, is this some kind of lawyer thing to win a case? That's a little petty for a lawyer of his caliber. Or is it his thing, declaring every defendant his wife? The truth will come out. He'll lose his name, and you'll lose the baby, you and Bilton. This is ridiculous. Young man, I'm sorry, but I really need my wife. Matthew came over and hugged and kissed Anastasia. Anastasia, if you have any questions for my wife, feel free to contact me. I'm not only a husband. I'm also a lawyer. I advised her not to communicate with you. If you have an irresistible urge to socialize, there are reporters outside. They have a lot of questions for you. Good day to you. Matthew led his ex-wife Anastasia through the crowd of reporters, tossing no comment, and handed her to Nellie, and handed her into Nellie's arms. Girls, I've got some more business to take care of here. I've got paperwork to do. And you have nothing else to do here. I think you have a lot to talk about. Anastasia, take a cab and go to Nellie's. I'll pick you up there later. As she got into the cab, Anastasia saw the crowd of journalists rushing to the courthouse doors. They surrounded the Wonsons who had come out. They couldn't get through. If you please, gentlemen, did you order a scandal? It's déjà vu all over again, same apartment, same kitchen, same two girlfriends. Only now there was no consolation but no news to tell. Nayli was curious, what was it? Where did Bilton come from? And most interesting of all, was he really a husband? Anastasia told everything that had happened to her in the meantime. Nayli was surprised, about to cry a couple of times, but asked the question head on. So is he your husband? Oh, Nayli, I don't know. I think we married to win a case. But I love him so much I don't know how I can let him go. And he wants to let go. Who knows? He kissed me so hard today, I believed he didn't. Or maybe he was just reassuring me. He could see I was worried. I think I'm in love again. One love wasn't enough. No, Anastasia, don't compare. I told you about your boy Major right off the bat. But you didn't listen. This one's different. Remember when you sent him to me? I was tense at first, and then I looked, and he was all over the place. He got everyone he could to help you. I didn't know he was a big-time lawyer. I was just glad you had a real man by your side. But he complimented you a lot too. I was jealous of him. Oh, come on. I'm not an oligarch or an expensive lawyer. But I think I found the right guy. And you're not talking. So tell me, local. No, I've got a reputation here, you get a lot of assholes hitting on me. When Anastasia left, Nayli was sad. They asked her to work at the restaurant again. She took it. She had to make a living. More gangster faces, obscene offers. All in a circle, no way out. One morning when she was leaving the restaurant, a young man came up, said that he was on a business trip, he had nowhere to go, and spent every evening in the restaurant. Strangely, Nayli didn't remember him. He walked her home, and then again. And then again a week later he was going home and suddenly called Nayli with him. Let's go and see where I live and meet my mom. Just for a couple days. What have we beautiful people got to lose? So Nayli went. She stayed there only 2 days, but the trip back and forth took a week. Alex lived in a small town in Houston, in the Appalachian foothills. It was an amazing town. Everywhere you went, there were mountains ahead. The town stood in a valley, but there were mountains on all sides, southern-style bright, blooming, even in winter. For a native Houstonian, it was a fabulous little house in a thicket of unseen bushes. Alex's sweet, friendly mom Nayli fell in love with the city, the house, and a little bit of Alex. Back to gray, unfriendly Houston. More restaurants, drunken suitors. Alex wrote called, but she didn't dare change her fate so abruptly. 2 days ago, his mom wrote, Nayli, my daughter, would you come back? Alex is waiting for you. You liked it here. So come. Of course, we don't know each other much, but if you like Alex, don't waste time, we're waiting for you. Anastasia, I think I might go. What if this is my chance? I'm not going to have a life here. Either I drink, or I'm going to get my ass handed to me by gangsters. And then I'll be lost for sure. Do you love Alex? I'm not sure yet, but I think I could love him. He's a good guy, and his mom is amazing. Nayli, I'm not much of a counselor. I can't figure out my own life. But if you like Alex, you should go. If you don't go now, you'll spend the rest of your life thinking, if I'd gone then, I'd have been happy. But you know it's better to do it and regret it. Matthew arrived, covered the girls' party. As Nayli and Anastasia were saying goodbye, Matthew suddenly said, Girls, don't you want to go to your homeland? Seeing the perplexed looks, he continued. Why are you surprised? Nayli, when did you visit your mom? Anastasia, your mother, I think, has never seen her grandson. And we have a new son-in-law to get to know. Let's take Rosalie and go. Do you have a place to put a big group like that? We drove home. Anastasia was silent again. She just didn't know what to say. How extraordinary he was. The best. At home, cozy, warm, Rosalie in denial, whom no one would ever take away. Happiness is so simple. A week later, they were going to go to the village. Matthew went into town to pick up Nayli. Rosalie and Anastasia were packing. There wasn't much to pack, just a couple of sweaters and some pants for Tyler. But Rosalie couldn't go empty-handed, and Anastasia was baking pies. Rosalie was carrying jars of salads and pickles. She wanted to bring some mushrooms and cabbage, but Anastasia stood up for her. "Rosalie, we're not going to starve. We'll take the pies. But if we bring pickles and tomatoes, Mom will be offended. She's got plenty of that stuff. Or do you think yours is better?" That's what she'll think. She'll be offended. "Why don't we buy her some marshmallows? She loves marshmallows, and they rarely bring them to the village." The daughter's return stirred up the whole village. Neighbors ran to the house of Jennifer, Anastasia's mother, all day long, some for salt, some for flour, some for potatoes. Suddenly everyone had run out of everything, and there was nowhere to get it but Jennifer's. And the wailing began. "Oh, Anastasia, how beautiful you've become. Like you used to be ugly. Is that your little boy? You didn't come with a stranger, did you?" Anastasia Vonson is interesting. But that's not why we're here. Anastasia brought her new husband. That's who I'm curious to see. Oh, what a guy. Only in the city. Here, girls, you're sitting here, you can't get married. And Anastasia Duck has a second husband, and he's rich again. And with a child. Did you hear Nayli's getting married, going south? Not to Dan, is she? I don't think so. Come on, it's all Latinos in the South. Anyway, the village was filled with gossip for a week. Matthew put up with the sightings. He knew it was the village's main entertainment. Jennifer felt bad for the villagers, but she couldn't help it. She couldn't chase the neighbors out of the yard. In the evening, they were finally alone. We sat at the table and talked. Jennifer really liked her daughter's husband. It wasn't that he was an established, serious, famous lawyer. Her first husband was not bad either, a tractor driver. Jennifer saw the way Matthew looked at her daughter. If they said now that the marriage wasn't real, that there was no relationship between them, Jennifer wouldn't believe it. But no one had told her that. And no one had told Jennifer that Rosalie was not related to Matthew in any way. She wondered who she was to Matthew. If she calls him by his first name and middle name, she's not his mother. Though it could happen. But she didn't feel comfortable asking. And why should she? What difference does it make? The main thing is that her daughter is loved in this family. She could feel it. And her grandson is a delight. She lived, she waited. What more could she ask for? Jennifer couldn't sleep at night. She went into the kitchen and poured tea. Something was troubling her. It seemed to her that Anastasia was keeping her safe and not telling her the whole truth. Rosalie heard that Jennifer was awake. She lay there thinking and finally decided that a mother had a right to know how much trouble her daughter had been through. "You can't sleep?" "Yeah, it's a little unsettling." "You tell me, is Anastasia okay?" "She is now. Actually, of course she is. Andrew tried to take the baby away from her. Matthew saved her. Your girl is a tough cookie, a tough nut to crack. She fought so hard, and Matthew just fell in love. But if he hadn't, he would have helped her anyway." So Rosalie told Jennifer everything, or almost everything. She didn't mention the fake marriage. Why would she if it wasn't relevant? What did she say? No, she didn't say anything. Wouldn't I have helped? No, Jennifer. She couldn't have come to you, they would have found her immediately. It's fate, really. If she hadn't gotten lost and come to us, you'd never have seen your grandson. Early in the morning, Anastasia got up and went to the kitchen. She wanted to make her own breakfast. Rosalie's cooking. She's so lazy. But again, it didn't work. Rosalie and her mother were already in the kitchen. There was a pile of pancakes on the table. "Mommy, did you guys bake pancakes all night?" Her mom came over to Anastasia, kissed her, hugged her, held her tight. "Mom, what are you doing?" Anastasia looked into her mom's eyes, tears welling up. "Did something happen to you?" "No, sweetie. It's okay now, we're cooking. Go on." Anastasia pulled the blanket off the bed, wrapped herself up tightly, and went out onto the porch. It was a frosty, fresh morning. And there was also a huge, indestructible feeling of happiness. That was it. No more troubles and misery. Home, Jennifer's mom, Rosalie, Matthew. That was all there was to happiness. The door opened. Another cocoon, Matthew, fell out onto the porch. "You know, it turns out I miss practicing law." Your case, I'm sorry, it's not my level. I think it's time to call it a night and get back to work. If you ever think about it, will you come with me? That's not how I'm asking you. First it was, Anastasia, will you marry me? I've already. No, that doesn't count. The first one, a real wife, someone I love. I want a wedding. Although I think you're the one who should be talking. You and I haven't even exchanged rings. You can't do that. I don't get it. Are you in? Or are we getting divorced? No, we're not. I'm in.